In the dead of night, a chilling letter slips under Hercule Poirot's door. Its elegant script whispering of a scandal buried deep in his past-forgotten case in Bruges that could destroy his legendary reputation. Why now, after 20 years, does a shadowy conspiracy resurface, threatening to unravel the great detective's legacy? From the fog-drenched alleys of Bruges to the glittering salons of London, Poirot chases a trail of secrets: a murdered merchant, a coerced confession, a missing sapphire brooch, and a secret society called the Order of the Saffron Veil. Who is the mysterious figure pulling the strings? And what devastating truth about Poirot's youth lies hidden in the dossier he burned? Its betrayal, danger, and a cryptic new clue pointing to Istanbul emerge. One question burns: can Poirot outwit a conspiracy that knows his every weakness, or will his past bury him? Chapter 1. The Whisper in the Fog. The fog clung to London like a conspirator, muffling the clatter of hooves and the cries of street vendors as it swirled through Whitechapel's narrow alleys. Hercule Poirot sat by the window of his impeccably ordered flat at 56B Whitehaven Mansions, his small, fastidious hands folded over a steaming cup of tisane. The world beyond the glass was a blur of gray, but his mind sharp as the edge of a guillotine sliced through the haze with relentless precision. He was waiting for what he could not yet say, but the air held a peculiar weight, as though the universe itself were holding its breath. The morning had begun like any other, with the ritual of his breakfast: 2 eggs, boiled for precisely 3 minutes and 42 seconds, a slice of toast cut into perfect squares, and the tisane brewed from a blend he had perfected over decades. His valet, George, had laid out the newspaper, pressed and folded, but Poirot had barely glanced at it. His attention was elsewhere, drawn to a faint unease that had settled in his chest since the post arrived. Among the usual invitations and bills, there had been a single letter, its envelope unmarked, save for his name in an elegant, looping script that seemed to dance across the paper. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he reached for the letter again, its weight slight but somehow portentous. He had opened it hours ago, yet its contents gnawed at him, demanding his scrutiny. The paper was thick, expensive, with a faint watermark of a fleur-de-lis. The words, written in black ink with a quill's flourish, were few but sharp. Monsieur Poirot, the past does not sleep. In Bruges, a secret lies buried, one that binds your name to a crime forgotten. Seek the truth in the Leclerc dossier, or it will seek you. The order watches: no signature, no return address, only the cryptic warning and a chill that had nothing to do with the damp London air. Poirot's mustache twitched as he read it again, his mind racing through the years. Bruges. The name stirred a memory, faint but persistent, like a melody half remembered. He had been a young detective then, barely out of his 20s, working with the Belgian police before the war had scattered his life like leaves in a storm. A case in Bruges, yes, but which one? And why now, after decades of silence, did it resurface? He rose, his polished shoes clicking on the hardwood floor, and moved to his desk, where a small, leather-bound notebook awaited. Poirot was not a man to trust memory alone. He recorded everything, every case, every name, every detail. His fingers, nimble despite their age, flipped through the pages, the ink entries as meticulous as a monk's manuscript. There it was: 1905, Bruges, the murder of Antoine Leclerc. A wealthy merchant found dead in his opulent mansion, his throat slit with a precision that suggested both skill and rage. The case had been closed swiftly, the blame pinned on a servant who confessed under pressure. Poirot had been a junior officer, his role minor, but he remembered the unease he'd felt at the time. The sense that the truth had been too neatly packaged. The letter's mention of a Leclerc dossier was new. No such dossier had existed. In this time, or so he thought. In this order to watched what was it? A secret society, a vengeful family, a figment of a prankster's imagination. Poirot's lips pursed. He did not believe in pranks, not when they were delivered with such deliberate menace. Someone knew something, and they wanted him to know they knew. The thought was intolerable. Hercule Poirot did not abide being outmaneuvered. He rang the bell for George, who appeared with the silent efficiency of a shadow. "George, my good man, prepare my travel case. We depart for Bruges tomorrow morning. The first train, I think. And to telegram to Captain Hastings. Inform him I may require his assistance." "Bruges, sir?" George's tone was as neutral as ever, but his raised eyebrow betrayed a flicker of curiosity. "Oui, Bruges, a matter of some urgency." "And George," Poirot added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "ensure the case contains my best walking stick. One never knows when one might need to prod the truth from the shadows." As George retreated, Poirot returned to the window, the letter still in hand. The fog seemed to thicker now, pressing against the glass like a living thing. He felt the first stirrings of excitement, the thrill of a puzzle that demanded his little gray cells. But beneath it, there was something else of faint dread, a whisper that perhaps this time the puzzle was not just about a crime, but about him. The train to Bruges was a marvel of modern engineering, its steam engine chugging through the damp Belgian countryside with a rhythm that soothed Poirot's nerves. He sat in a first-class compartment, his black patent leather shoes gleaming, his Homburg hat resting on the seat beside him. Captain Hastings, ever the loyal friend, had joined him at the last moment, his boyish enthusiasm undimmed by the years. "I say, Poirot, this is all rather mysterious, isn't it?" Hastings said, leaning forward, his eyes bright with curiosity. "A secret letter, a trip to Bruges, what's it all about?" Poirot adjusted his cufflinks, his expression inscrutable. "It is, mon ami, a matter of the past reaching into the present. A case I thought closed may not be so. A key, but we must proceed with care. The one who sent this letter, they know more than they should." Hastings frowned, his brow furrowing in that earnest way Poirot found both endearing and exasperating. "You don't think it's a trap, do you? Some old enemy trying to lure you out?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, his voice soft but edged with steel. "But if it is a trap, they will find that Hercule Poirot is not so easily caught. Now, tell me, Hastings, what do you know of Bruges?" Hastings grinned, settling back in his seat. "Oh, it's a charming place, isn't it? All those canals and old buildings, like something out of a fairy tale. I went there once, years ago, with my cousin. Lovely beer, too." Poirot's mustache twitched with faint disapproval. "Beer, Hastings, is not the point. Bruges is a city of secrets, of history layered like the cobblestones. It is a place where the past does not fade, it waits." The train whistle shrieked, and the compartment filled with the scent of coal and damp wool. Poirot's gaze drifted to the window, where the landscape blurred into a patchwork of green fields and gray skies. He thought of the letter again, its words etched in his mind. The order watches. The phrase was theatrical, almost absurd, yet it carried a weight that unsettled him. He had faced many adversaries, murderers, thieves, blackmailers, but this felt different. Personal de Bruges greeted them with a drizzle that turned the cobblestones slick and treacherous. The city was, as Poirot remembered, a labyrinth of narrow streets, gabled houses, leaning over canals like gossiping neighbors, and the distant toll of church bells. He and Hastings checked into a small hotel near the mart, its facade adorned with ivy and faded grandeur. Poirot wasted no time. After a quick change into a heavier coat to ward off the chill, he set out for the city archives, where he hoped to find the mysterious Leclerc dossier. The archives were housed in a Gothic building that seemed to groan under the weight of its own history. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old paper and wax. A clerk, a young man with ink-stained fingers and a nervous twitch, directed them to Madame Dubois, the head archivist. She was a woman of indeterminate age, her silver hair pinned tightly, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. She greeted Poirot with a nod, as though she had been expecting him. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low and accented with the soft lilt of Walloon French. "I received your telegram. You seek the Leclerc dossier, yes?" "Precisement," Poirot replied, his tone polite but firm. "I understand it contains information about a case from 1905, a murder." Madame Dubois's lips tightened, and she glanced around the dimly lit room where shelves groaned under the weight of leather-bound volumes. "The dossier is unusual. It was sealed by order of the chief magistrate at the time. I only discovered it last month during a cataloging project. But, monsieur, it is not here." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Not here? Then where?" Madame hesitated, her fingers twisting a small silver locket at her throat. "It was removed 2 days ago by a man who claimed to represent the city council. He had papers, official ones, but—" She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I did not trust him. His eyes, they were too eager, too hungry. He asked about you, Monsieur Poirot. He knew you would come." Hastings, standing behind Poirot, let out a low whistle. "I say, that's a bit rum, isn't it? Someone's one step ahead of us." Poirot's expression remained calm, but his mind was racing. "This man, madame, describe him." "Tall, thin, with a scar on his left cheek. He wore a black coat, too heavy for the weather, and his accent, was not Belgian. Perhaps German or Dutch. He called himself Vandermeer." Poirot filed the name away, his little gray cells humming. "And the dossier, what did it contain?" Madame Dubois shook her head. "I only glimpsed it. Pages of testimony, photographs, a map of the Leclerc estate, and something else. A letter addressed to you, but it was old, written in the same hand as the case notes." Poirot's heart skipped a beat, but his face betrayed nothing. "Merci, madame. You have been most helpful. If this Vandermeer returns, you will contact me at once." As they left the archives, the drizzle had turned to rain, drumming against Poirot's umbrella. Hastings was practically bouncing with excitement. "Well, Poirot, this is getting jolly interesting. A stolen dossier, a mysterious stranger what's next?" Poirot did not answer immediately. His eyes scanned the street, taking in the blurred figures moving through the rain. He felt the weight of unseen eyes, the same sensation he'd had in London when he first read the letter. Someone was watching, orchestrating this game with a precision that rivaled his own. "Next, mon ami," he said at last, "we visit the Leclerc estate. If the dossier is gone, the scene of the crime may yet speak to us." Leclerc estate lay on the outskirts of Bruges, a sprawling mansion half swallowed by ivy and time. Its gardens wild, as though the house itself mourned its former glory. Poirot and Hastings were met at the gate by a groundskeeper, an old man with a face like crumpled parchment, who led them to the front door with a grunt of reluctance. The current owner, Henry Leclerc, was Antoine's grandson, a man in his late 30s with the pallor of someone who rarely saw sunlight. He greeted them in the drawing room, a cavernous space filled with dusty furniture and faded tapestries. Henry was an artist, or so he claimed, his hands stained with paint, his eyes darting nervously as Poirot explained their purpose. "You wish to know about my grandfather's murder?" Henry said, his voice sharp with suspicion. "It was solved, was it not?" the servant confessed. "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone mild, but his eyes piercing. But there are consistencies. A dossier, recently uncovered, suggests otherwise. You know of it, perhaps? Henry's fingers tightened around a paintbrush he held, its bristles crusted with crimson. A dossier? No, I know nothing of that. My grandfather's death was a tragedy, but it's ancient history. Why stir it up now? Poirot smiled, a small, dangerous smile. 'Cause, monsieur, history has a way of stirring itself. Tell me, what do you paint? The question seemed to catch Henry off guard. He gestured to a canvas in the corner, half covered by a cloth. Portraits, mostly, family, history, that sort of thing. Poirot approached the canvas, his movements deliberate. He lifted the cloth, revealing a painting of a woman in a blue dress, her throat adorned with a sapphire brooch that gleamed with an almost unnatural light. The brushwork was exquisite, but there was something unsettling about the woman's eyes, wide, fearful, as though she were staring into an abyss. Magnifique, Poirot murmured, though his mind was elsewhere. A brooch. It matched the description in his old case notes, an heirloom mentioned in passing during the investigation. This brooch, Monsieur Leclerc, is a family piece. Henry's face darkened. It was lost years ago. A paint from memory, from stories my grandmother told me. Poirot nodded, but his instincts screamed that Henry was lying. The painting was too vivid, too precise for mere memory. He made a mental note to investigate further, but for now he would play the game. Mercy, monsieur, we will not trouble you further, but if you recall anything about this dossier, you will inform me. Henry's nod was curt, his eyes avoiding Poirot's. As they left the estate, Hastings whispered, "He's hiding something, isn't he?" "Without doubt," Poirot replied, his voice low. "But what and why? That is the question." Back at the hotel, Poirot sat at a small desk. The anonymous letter spread before him. The rain had stopped, and the fog had returned, curling around. The street lamps, like a living thing, had slipped the corner of Henry's sketch, small study of the sapphire brooch, to his pocket when Henry wasn't looking. It was a risk, but Poirot was not above a little sleight of hand when the truth demanded it. The sketch was meticulous, almost obsessive, with annotations in Henry's cramped handwriting. One word stood out: saffron. Poirot's breath caught. The order of the saffron veil. Was it coincidence or something more? He closed his eyes, letting his little gray cells work, piecing together the fragments: the letter, TCA, the brooch, Henry's NEs. Someone was pulling strings, and Poirot was determined to find the puppeteer. He rose, his movements brisk. "Hastings, we dine lightly tonight. Tomorrow we pursue this Vandermeer and the missing dossier. But for now, I must think." As Hastings retired to his room, Poirot stood by the window, staring into the fog. The game had begun, and he was both player and prize. Thought was exhilarating, but it carried a shadow of fear. For the first time in years, Hercule Poirot wondered if the truth he sought might be one he wished to leave buried. But leave it buried he would not. The fog might hide the path, but Poirot's mind was a beacon, and he would follow it to the end. Chapter 2. Shadows of the old Caistor train to Bruges rattled through the dawn, its rhythmic clatter a counterpoint to the unease quelling in Hercule Poirot's chest. The anonymous letter, its elegant script burned into his memory, lay folded in his breast pocket, a silent accusation, scandal from his past, tied to a forgotten case in this very city, threatened to unravel the reputation he had so meticulously built. The dossier Madame de Bois had promised awaited him, its contents a mystery that both intrigued and unnerved him. As the Belgian countryside blurred past, mist clinging to the fields like a shroud, Poirot's mind churned with questions. Truth had lain buried for 20 years, and who sought to wield it against him now? Bruges greeted him with a damp chill. its cobblestone streets glistening under a sky heavy with clouds. The city, with its medieval spires and languid canals, seemed to whisper secrets of its own. Poirot adjusted his overcoat, his mustache impeccably groomed despite the early hour, and made his way to the archivist's office near the mart. The air carried the faint scent of damp stone and baking bread, a reminder of his youth spent in these very streets as a fledgling detective. Nostalgia, however, was a luxury he could not afford today. Madame Dubois's office was tucked into a narrow building, its facade adorned with ivy that seemed to strangle the stonework. The archivist, a wiry woman with sharp eyes and a nervous tick in her left hand, greeted him with a mixture of deference and apprehension. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low, as if the walls themselves might eavesdrop. "I did not expect you so soon." "Time, madame, is a thief that waits for no one," Poirot replied, his tone measured but firm. "You spoke of a dossier. I am here to see it." She hesitated, her fingers twitching toward a brass key on her desk. "It is sensitive, monsieur. I found it by chance, buried in the municipal archives under a false index. Someone went to great lengths to hide it." "Then let us waste no more time," Poirot said, his green eyes narrowing. "The truth, it does not remain hidden forever." Madame Dubois led him to a cramped back room, its shelves groaning under the weight of dusty ledgers and yellowed files. From a locked cabinet, she retrieved a slim dossier bound in faded leather, its edges frayed as if time itself had clawed at it. "This is all I have," she said, placing it on a table. "But I warn you, monsieur, some truths are better left undisturbed." Poirot offered a tight smile. Madame Hercule Poirot does not fear the truth, however sharp its edges. She left him alone, her footsteps echoing down the hall. Poirot opened the dossier, his gloved hand steady despite the pulse quickening in his veins. The pages within were brittle, the ink faded but legible. They detailed a case from 1905, the murder of Antoine Leclerc, a wealthy merchant found dead in his Bruges mansion, his skull fractured by a blunt instrument. The official report, signed by a younger Poirot, declared the case closed with the confession of a servant, Jacques Moreau. Yet the anonymous letter's words echoed in his mind. The real killer was never caught. The dossier painted a vivid picture. Leclerc's body had been discovered in his study. A room of opulent chaos books strewn across the floor, a crystal decanter shattered, and a single candle still burning, its wax pooling like blood. The servant, Jacques, had confessed to a crime of passion, claiming Leclerc had insulted his family. The evidence was tidy: a bloodied candlestick, Jacques' fingerprints, a motive deemed sufficient by the local magistrate. Poirot remembered the case as a triumph of his early career, a neat resolution that had earned him accolades. But now, doubt gnawed at him. Had he been too quick to accept the confession? Had he missed something vital? He turned the page, and a name caught his eye. Henry Leclerc, the victim's grandson, now the sole heir to the crumbling Leclerc estate. The dossier noted Henry's absence during the investigation. He had been studying art in Paris at the time, but a marginal note, scrawled in an unfamiliar hand, read, "Henry knows more than he says." Poirot's lips pursed. The grandson, then a boy of 17, was now a man in his late 30s, a reclusive artist living in the shadow of his family's tragedy. If anyone held the key to the case's secrets, it was he, closing the dossier. Poirot slipped it into his satchel and left the archives, his mind alight with purpose. The Leclerc estate lay on the outskirts of Bruges, a half-hour's journey by hired car. The driver, a laconic man with a scar above his brow, glanced at Poirot in the rearview mirror. "Not many visit the Leclerc place," he said, his voice rough. "They say it's cursed." "Superstition, my friend, is the refuge of the unimaginative," Poirot replied, though his fingers tightened on the dossier. "Take me there, if you please." The estate loomed at the end of a winding lane. Its once grand facade, now weathered, ivy choking the stonework like veins on a dying heart. The windows were dark, save for a single flicker of light in an upper room. Poirot stepped out, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the muddy path. The air was heavy with the scent of decaying leaves, and a faint hum, like a distant chant, carried on the wind. He knocked on the heavy oak door, its brass knocker shaped like a lion's head, and waited. The door creaked open, revealing Henry Leclerc. He was tall, gaunt, with a shock of dark hair streaked with premature gray. His eyes, a piercing blue, studied Poirot with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. He wore a paint-splattered smock, his fingers stained with ochre and indigo. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice soft but edged with wariness. "I heard you were in Bruges. What brings you to my door?" "The past, Monsieur Leclerc," Poirot said, stepping inside, uninvited. "It has a way of refusing to stay buried." The interior of the mansion was a study in faded grandeur. Its motes danced in the shafts of light, filtering through cracked shutters, and the air smelled of mildew and turpentine. Henry led Poirot to a parlor, its walls lined with his paintings, dark, swirling canvases that seemed to pulse with suppressed emotion. One depicted a figure in a hooded cloak, standing over a crumpled body, a sapphire glinting at its throat. Poirot's eyes lingered on it, his mind cataloging the detail. "You are an artist of some intensity," Poirot remarked, gesturing to the painting. "This image is inspired by your grandfather's death, perhaps?" Henry's jaw tightened. "You're direct, monsieur. My grandfather's murder is a wound this family has never healed. But I was in Paris when it happened. I know nothing of it." "Yet your art suggests otherwise," Poirot said, his tone mild but probing. "This figure, this sapphire, what did they mean to you?" Henry turned away, busying himself with a decanter of amber liquid. "Art is interpretation, Monsieur Poirot. It doesn't mean anything specific. Would you care for a drink?" "No, mercy," Poirot said, his eyes never leaving Henry. "I am here for clarity, not distraction. Tell me, what do you know of a dossier concerning your grandfather's case? One that suggests the wrong man was condemned." Henry's hand froze mid-pour, a flicker of something fear, perhaps, crossing his face. "A dossier? I know nothing of it," the servant confessed. "The case was closed. Why dredge up old pain?" "Because, monsieur, someone has seen fit to remind me of it," Poirot said, producing the anonymous letter but keeping it just out of reach. "This arrived at my flat. It speaks of a conspiracy, a truth hidden for 20 years, up, and it points to you." Henry's eyes widened, but he recovered quickly, setting the decanter down with a clink. "You think I sent it? Why would I? I've no interest in revisiting the past. I paint to escape it." "Perhaps," Poirot said, stepping closer to a painting of a shattered candlestick, its base smeared with crimson. "But your work betrays a preoccupation with that past. Tell me, monsieur, who else might wish to stir this old wound?" Henry's lips thinned. "My family has enemies. My grandfather was a hard man, ruthless in business. There were whispers of debts unpaid, rivals scorned. But I was a boy then. I heard only fragments." "Fragments can form a picture," Poirot said, "and I am very good at assembling pictures." The conversation turned evasive, Henry deflecting with talk of his art and the estate's disrepair. Poirot listened, his mind dissecting every word, every glance. Henry's intensity, his guarded responses, suggested more than mere grief. There was something he was hiding, something buried in the strokes of his brush. As they spoke, Poirot's gaze fell on a sketchbook left open on a side table, its pages filled with studies of a sapphire brooch, its facets rendered with obsessive detail. "An interesting subject," Poirot said, nodding toward the sketchbook. "This brooch appears often in your work. Family heirloom, perhaps." Henry snatched the sketchbook, closing it with a snap. "It's just a design, nothing more," but Poirot had seen enough. The brooch matched the description in the dossier: sapphire star, lost after the murder, never recovered. Its presence in Henry's art was no coincidence. As the conversation wound down, Poirot excused himself, citing a need to return to his hotel. But as he passed the sketchbook, his nimble fingers slipped a single page free, tucking it into his sleeve with a magician's grace. Henry, distracted by his own unease, noticed nothing. Outside, the mist had thickened, cloaking the estate inn. A ghostly veil. Poirot's car waited, the driver's silhouette barely visible through the fog. As he climbed in, Poirot unfolded the stolen sketch. It depicted the sapphire brooch, but in the background was a faint outline of a woman's face, her eyes wide with fear. The image sent a shiver through him, not of cold, but of certainty. Henry Leclerc knew more than he admitted, and this sketch was a thread in the tapestry of truth Poirot was determined to unravel. The car rumbled back toward Bruges. The city's lights dim pinpricks in the gloom. Poirot's mind raced, piecing together the fragments, the dossier's hints, Henry's cryptic art, the sapphire brooch that seemed to bind them all. Someone had sent that letter to draw him here, to force him to confront a case he had thought closed. But why? And how did Henry, with his haunted eyes and trembling hands, fit into this murky conspiracy? Back at his hotel, a modest but elegant establishment near the Minnewater, Poirot spread the dossier and the stolen sketch on his desk. The sapphire brooch stared up at him, its drawn facets glinting with secrets. He recalled Madame Dubois's warning. Some truths are better left undisturbed. But Poirot was not a man to leave shadows unexplored. He would pursue this trail wherever it led, even if it meant confronting the ghost of his own past. As night fell over Bruges, the canals reflecting the moon's pale glow, Poirot lit a cigarette, a rare indulgence, and Algin sand exhaled a plume of smoke that curled like a question mark. The game, as his friend Hastings might say, was afoot, and Hercule Poirot, with his little gray cells and unyielding resolve, would not rest until every shadow was brought to light. The next morning, Poirot rose early, his mind sharpened by a night of restless thought. The stolen sketch lay tucked inside his satchel, a silent accomplice in his quest. He decided to revisit the Leclerc estate, but not as a guest. This time he would observe unseen, seeking the unguarded moments that often revealed the most. He hired a bicycle from a shop near the hotel. Its owner, a cheerful man who prattled about Bruges' history as he adjusted the seat. Poirot, dressed in a less conspicuous coat and hat, pedaled toward the estate under a sky threatening rain. The journey was brisk, the air sharp with the promise of a storm. He hid the bicycle in a copse of trees near the estate's boundary and approached on foot, his steps silent on the damp grass. The mansion loomed ahead, its silhouette stark against the gray clouds. Poirot circled to the rear, where a neglected garden sprawled, its rose bushes choked with weeds. A greenhouse, its glass panes cracked, stood at the garden's edge, and through its murky windows he saw movement. Henry was inside, bent over a canvas, his brush moving with feverish intensity. Poirot crept closer, his breath shallow, until he could see the painting, a woman in a blue gown, her throat adorned with a sapphire brooch, her face contorted in a silent scream. The image was chilling, but it was Henry's actions that held Poirot's attention. The artist paused, setting down his brush, and retrieved a small wooden box from a shelf. He opened it, revealing a glint of bluest sapphire, unmistakable even from a distance. Poirot's heart quickened. Was this the missing brooch, hidden all these years? Before he could decide his next move, Henry snapped the box shut and slipped it into his pocket, then left the greenhouse, locking the door behind him. Poirot waited, his mind racing. The brooch's presence confirmed his suspicions. Henry was entangled in the case's secrets, perhaps as more than a witness. But why keep the brooch hidden, and why paint it obsessively, as if both haunted and compelled by its existence? Poirot retreated to the trees, his thoughts a whirlwind. Needed more than a stolen sketch and a glimpse of a gem. He needed context, motive, truth. Returning to Bruges, Poirot sought out the city's oldest tavern, Désorte Cat, a dimly lit establishment where locals whispered over mugs of dark ale. The bartender, a grizzled man named Peter, knew the Leclerc family's history, right? A cup of strong coffee. Poirot declined the ale. Peter shared rumors of Antoine Leclerc's ruthlessness, unpaid debts, ruined rivals, and a mistress who vanished after the murder. Some say she took a jewel with her, Peter said, his eyes narrowing. Sapphire, worth a fortune, never found. Poirot's pulse quickened, but he kept his expression neutral. And Henry, the grandson, what did they say of him? Peter shrugged. Quiet, strange, keeps to himself, painting those creepy pictures. Folks say he's got his grandfather's temper, but none of his ambition. Thanking Peter, Poirot left the tavern, his mind alight with connections. The mistress, the brooch, Henry's artel, threads in a tapestry. He was only beginning to see. He returned to his hotel and penned a letter to an old contact in Paris, a retired detective who had worked the 1905 case peripherally. Perhaps he could shed light on the mistress or the brooch's fate. That night, as rain lashed the windows, Poirot studied the stolen sketch again. The woman's face, faint but distinct, bore a resemblance to a portrait he'd seen in the dossier, a photograph of Celeste Leclerc, Antoine's widow. Yet the dossier had never mentioned her wearing the brooch. Was Henry painting his grandmother or someone else? And why the expression of terror? The next day brought a reply from Paris, scrawled in hasty ink. The detective, now elderly, recalled a woman named Elise Moreau, Antoine's mistress, had fled Bruges after the murder. She was rumored to have taken the sapphire brooch, though no proof was ever found. Lise had been an opera singer, her beauty legendary, her disappearance abrupt. The detective's final line chilled Poirot. Some said she saw the killer, but feared to speak. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. Elise Moreau. The name was a spark in the darkness, illuminating a path forward. If she was alive, she might hold the key to the truth. And if Henry's paintings depicted her or Celestine, the brooch was more than a jewel. It was a witness to murder. Determined, Poirot planned his next move, to find Elise, or whatever remained of her trail. But first, he would return to the Leclerc estate, this time to confront Henry directly about the brooch, the artist's evasions, his haunted art, and the glint of sapphire in that greenhouse suggested a man caught in a web of his own making. Poirot would unravel it thread by thread till the truth stood bare. As he prepared for the confrontation, a knock at his hotel door startled him. A boy, no older than 12, handed him an envelope, then darted away. Poirot opened it, his hands steady despite the prickle of unease. Inside was a single line, written in the same elegant script as the anonymous letter. Leave Bruges, or the past will bury you. Poirot's lips curved into a grim smile. Threats, it seemed, were the currency of this conspiracy. But Hercule Poirot was not a man to be intimidated. He tucked the note into his pocket, beside the first letter, and resolved to face Henry Leclerc with the full force of his intellect. The shadows of the old case were lengthening, but Poirot would chase them until they yielded their secrets. Chapter 3. The Widow's Confession. The mist clung to the cobblestone streets of Bruges like a conspirator, veiling the city's secrets in a damp, gray shroud. Hercule Poirot stepped off the train at Bruges Central Station, his polished shoes clicking against the platform with a rhythm as precise as his thoughts. The dossier from Madame Dubois lay tucked inside his overcoat, its weight a constant reminder of the past clawing its way into his present. The name he'd glimpsed within its page, Saint-Ouen Leclerc, had stirred memories he'd long buried. Memories of a younger Poirot, less meticulous, less infallible. Now, the anonymous letter's cryptic warning echoed in his mind. Your disgrace lies in Bruges, where truth was buried with a merchant's blood. Poirot adjusted his Homburg hat, his mustache twitching as he scanned the station. The platform bustled with travelers' merchants haggling over crates, nuns gliding silently toward their convents, and tourists marveling at the medieval spires piercing the fog. His destination was clear: the convent of St. Agnes, a secluded sanctuary on the city's outskirts where Madame Celeste Leclerc, widow of the murdered merchant, had retreated from the world. Her name had surfaced in the dossier, a faint thread in the tapestry of the 1905 case. And Poirot's instincts told him she held a key to the conspiracy threatening his reputation. He hailed a horse-drawn cab. Driver, a grizzled man with eyes like chipped flint. To St. Agnes, if you please, Poirot said, his French accent crisp, yet softened by years in London. The driver nodded, flicking the reins, and the cab lurched forward, wheels clattering over the uneven stones. As they wound through Bruges' narrow canals and gabled houses, Poirot's mind churned. The dossier had painted a troubling picture. Antoine Leclerc, stabbed in his study. A servant named Julien, convicted on a confession that now seemed coerced. The anonymous letter suggested the real killer had walked free, and Celeste Rollweather as witness, accomplice. A pawn remained unclear. The cab halted at the convent's iron gates, their filigree rusted but imposing. Beyond them, a stone wall encircled a cluster of austere buildings, their slate roofs glistening in the damp air. Poirot paid the driver and approached the gate, where a young nun, her face half hidden by a starched wimple, greeted him with a wary nod. "Monsieur Poirot?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oui, mademoiselle." "I am expected," offered a polite smile, but his gray-green eyes were sharp. Crust. Noting the nun's nervous glance toward the convent's shadowed courtyard, she led him through a cloister fragrant with lavender and damp earth, past silent sisters, tending herb gardens. The air carried a stillness that felt heavy, as if the convent itself held his breath. At last, they reached a small parlor, its walls adorned with faded tapestries of saints and martyrs. A woman sat by a narrow window, her silhouette framed against the gray light. Celeste Leclerc was no longer the vibrant beauty of her youth. Kea had etched lines into her face, and her once golden hair was now a brittle silver, pinned tightly beneath a black lace cap. Yet her eyes, a piercing blue, held a fire that time had not dimmed. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, rising slowly, her voice carrying the weight of years. "I wondered if you would come." "Madame Leclerc," Poirot replied, bowing slightly. "The past, it seems, has a way of summoning us both." He gestured to a chair opposite her, and she nodded, sinking back into her seat. The nun withdrew, closing the door with a soft click, leaving them alone. Celeste's hands trembled as she smoothed her skirt, a simple gray garment that seemed to blend with the room's austerity. "You've come about, Antoine," she said. Not a question, but a statement, her gaze fixed on the window as if she could see her late husband's face in the fog. "Oui, madame." And about a letter that claims the truth of his death was never told. Poirot's tone was gentle but firm, his eyes never leaving her face. Key leaned forward, his hands folded neatly over the dossier. "I have read the records of the case, but they are incomplete. You, I believe, know more than was written." Her lips tightened, and for a moment, Poirot thought she might dismiss him. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 2 decades, she began to speak. Antoine was a good man, but not a perfect one. His wealth came from trades, spices, silks, secrets. He had enemies, men who envied his success, others who feared his knowledge. When he was found dead, the police were quick to blame Julien, our servant. Too quick. Poirot tilted his head, his mustache quivering slightly. You believe Julien was innocent? Celeste's eyes flashed. I know he was. Julien was loyal, simple. He confessed because they threatened his family, his sister, his mother. They said they'd be ruined if he didn't take the blame. Her voice cracked, and she pressed a handkerchief to her lips. I let it happen, Monsieur Poirot. I let an innocent man go to the gallows. The confession hung in the air, heavy as the fog outside. Poirot's expression remained impassive, but his mind raced. This was no mere admission of guilt. It was a crack in the facade of the Leclerc case, a hint of the conspiracy the letter had warned of. Why, madame? He asked softly. Why did you allow this injustice? Her hands clenched, the handkerchief crumpling. To protect my son, Philippe. He was only 17, wild and impulsive. The police suspected him. Antoine's blood was on his coat, you see, from an argument they'd had that night. I couldn't let them take him. That's why I helped them build their case against Julien. I said I'd seen him near the study, holding the knife. It was a lie. Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on the dossier, a rhythm that betrayed his growing intrigue. And Philippe, was he innocent, as you claim? Celeste's eyes met his, fierce and unyielding. He was no murderer. He loved his father, despite their quarrels, but the police wouldn't believe it. They wanted a quick resolution, and Julien was convenient. She paused, her gaze drifting to the tapestry of St. Agnes, her eyes glistening. I've carried that sin for 20 years. Every night I see Julien's face, hear his pleas. I came to this convent to atone, but there is no forgiveness for what I've done. Poirot leaned back, his mind assembling the pieces of her story, like a puzzle. The confession was compelling, but something was amiss. Her words were too polished, too rehearsed, as if she prepared for this moment. And then there was the matter of the sapphire brooch, mentioned in a dossier as a missing heirloom from the crime scene. It had not appeared in her tale, and Poirot's instincts told him it was no mere trinket. Madame, he said, his voice smooth as velvet, there is one detail you have not mentioned. Brooch, a sapphire, part of your husband's collection. It vanished the night of the murder. Do you know of it? Celeste's face paled, her fingers tightening around the handkerchief. The brooch, she murmured, as if the word itself were a wound. It was a gift from Antoine, a family heirloom. I thought it stolen by some thief who saw opportunity in the chaos. I never saw it again. Poirot's eyes narrowed, catching the flicker of hesitation in her voice. And yet, madame, the dossier suggests it was more than a simple theft. It was not found among Julien's possessions, nor in the house. Where, I wonder, did it go? She shook her head, her expression a mix of defiance and fear. Don't. No, I swear it. After Antoine's death, I searched for it, thinking it might bring some comfort, but it was gone, like so much else. Poirot studied her, his little gray cells humming. The brooch was a thread he could not yet pull, but it was there, dangling, just out of reach. He rose, adjusting his coat with a precise tug. Merci, Madame Leclerc, your candor has been most illuminating. I'll trouble you no further. For now, as he turned to leave, Celeste's voice stopped him. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her tone urgent. Be careful. The past is not as dead as you think. There are those who would kill to keep it buried. He paused, his hand on the door, and offered her a small, enigmatic smile. The past, madame, is precisely what Hercule Poirot intends to exhume. Outside, the fog had thickened, wrapping the convent in a cocoon of silence. Poirot walked briskly toward the gate, his mind a whirl of contradictions. Celeste's confession was a breakthrough, yet it raised more questions than it answered. Why had she protected Philippe so fiercely, and what was the true nature of his quarrel with Antoine? And de Brochet's absence was no accident. It was a clue, perhaps, the key to the real killer's identity. He hailed another cab, directing the driver to a small cafe near the mart where he could think in peace. The cafe was a cozy haven, its walls lined with sepia photographs of old Bruges. Poirot ordered a tisane, its herbal scent calming his nerves as he opened the dossier once more. The pages on the brooch were sparse, noting only its value, a large sapphire set in gold, engraved with the Leclerc christen its disappearance, but a handwritten note in the margin in Madame Dubois' precise script caught his eye. Rumored, sold in Antwerp, 1906. Buyer unknown. Antwerp, a city of diamond merchants and shadowy dealers. The brooch had surfaced there, it suggested. Someone had profited from the murder, someone with connections beyond Bruges. Poirot sipped his tisane, his eyes gleaming with purpose. The trail was warming, and he would follow it, no matter how perilous. His thoughts were interrupted by a shadow falling across his table. A man stood there, lean and wiry, his face half hidden by a scarf. "Monsieur Poirot?" he asked, his voice low, accented with a hint of Flemish. Poirot's hand tightened around his cup, but his expression remained serene. "You have the advantage of me, monsieur." The man slid into the seat opposite, his eyes darting to the dossier. "You're digging into old graves. Some things are better left buried." Poirot's mustache twitched. "And yet, monsieur, I find the truth is like a fine wine, it only improves with time. Who are you, and why do you warn me?" The man leaned closer, his breath sour with tobacco. "Call me a friend of the past. The Leclerc case is dangerous. Tisk, there are eyes on you, eyes that don't blink. Walk away, or you'll regret it." Poirot's smile was cold. "Hercule Poirot does not walk away, but I thank you for your concern. Now, if you please, I have work to do." The man hesitated, then stood, melting into the crowd outside. Poirot watched him go, his mind cataloging every detail: the man's limp, the frayed cuff of his coat, the faint scent of clove on his breath. A hired messenger, perhaps, but sent by whom? The order of the saffron veil, mentioned in the dossier's cryptic footnotes. Or someone closer, someone tied to Celeste's confession. He paid for his tisane and stepped into the fog, his steps purposeful. The brooch was the key, and Antwerp was his next destination. But first, he would visit the Leclerc estate again, to confront Henry, the grandson, whose cryptic paintings and evasive demeanor suggested he knew more than he'd let on. Poirot's heart quickened, not with fear, but with the thrill of the chase. The conspiracy was unraveling, thread by thread, and he would follow it to its end. No matter who stood in his way, the road to the Leclerc estate was a winding path through marshlands, the air thick with the scent of peat and decay. Henry's home loomed ahead, a decaying relic of grandeur, its turrets half swallowed by ivy. Poirot knocked, and the door creaked open to reveal Henry himself. His artist's smock splattered with paint, his eyes wild with something between fear and defiance. "Monsieur Poirot," Henry said, his voice tight. "Back so soon?" "We, monsieur, have questions, and I believe you have answers." Poirot stepped inside, his gaze sweeping the cluttered hall canvases stacked against walls, their colors violent and chaotic. One painting caught his eye, a woman in blue, her face obscured, a sapphire brooch gleaming at her throat. Henry followed his gaze and stiffened. A fancy, nothing more. Poirot's smile was thin. A fancy, perhaps, but one with a remarkable resemblance to a certain heirloom. Tell me, Monsieur Leclerc, what do you know of your grandfather's brooch? Henry's laugh was brittle. You're chasing ghosts, Poirot. That brooch is long gone, like my family's fortune. Perhaps, Poirot said, his voice soft but unyielding. But ghosts, they have a way of speaking, Nan, and I intend to listen. He left the estate with a new resolve, the image of the painted brooch burning in his mind. Henry was hiding something, and Celeste's confession was only the beginning. The sapphire brooch was out there, a silent witness to a murder, and Poirot would find it, even if it meant unmasking a conspiracy that reached into the heart of his own past. Chapter 4. The broker of secrets Hercule Poirot stepped off the train in Bruges. The air thick with the damp chill of early autumn. The cobblestone streets gleamed under a recent drizzle, reflecting the gaslights that flickered like wary sentinels in the gathering dusk. His polished shoes clicked against the stones, a rhythmic counterpoint to the thoughts swirling in his meticulous mind. The sapphire brooch, Celeste Leclerc's tearful mention of it, had lodged in his memory like a splinter. It was no mere trinket. It was a key, a glittering cipher to a truth buried for 2 decades. And now the trail led to Monsieur Vassar, a man whose name whispered through the underbelly of Bruges like smoke through a keyhole. Poirot adjusted his hat, its brim shielding his sharp gray eyes from the mist, and made his way toward the antiquarian shop. The dossier from Madame Dubois had been maddeningly vague about Vassar, noting only his reputation as a dealer in rare artifacts and darker secrets. Yet Celeste's confession had pointed here to this shadowy figure who traded in truths as readily as he did in relics. Poirot's instincts hummed. Vassar was no ordinary merchant. He was a broker of the hidden, a man who wove webs between the powerful and the desperate. The shop, coot in a narrow alley off the market, was unassuming, faded sign reading Vassar's. Curious sights hung above a door that sagged on its hinges. The windows were clouded with grime, obscuring the interior. A faint glow spilled onto the street, beckoning like a siren's call. Poirot paused, his gloved hand resting on the door handle. He disliked entering any place without a clear sense of its occupants, but time was a luxury he did not have. The anonymous letter's threat loomed over him, its words etched in his mind. Your disgrace will be uncovered, Monsieur Poirot, unless you unearth the truth first. He pushed open the door, a bell jangling discordantly above. The air inside was heavy with the scent of old leather, dust, and something sharper in sense perhaps, or the tang of secrets long kept. Shelves groaned under the weight of artifacts, tarnished silver candelabras, chipped porcelain figurines, and books with spines cracked like ancient bones. At the far end of the shop, behind a counter cluttered with papers and a single flickering lamp, stood Monsieur Vassar. The man was younger than Poirot had expected, perhaps in his late 40s, with a lean frame and a face that seemed carved from wax-smooth, pale, and unnervingly still. His eyes, a pale green that caught the lamplight like a cat's, flicked up from a ledger. Monsieur Poirot, he said, his voice low and smooth, with a trace of amusement. I wondered when you would find me. Poirot's mustache twitched, but he kept his expression neutral. You know of me, Monsieur Vassar. That is most interesting. May I inquire how? Vassar closed the ledger with a deliberate snap, his fingers long and nimble. Bruges is a small city, monsieur, and its whispers travel fast. Man of your reputation, a detective of such renown, does not arrive unnoticed, especially when he asks questions about a certain sapphire brooch. Poirot's heart quickened, but he betrayed nothing. You are well informed. Then, perhaps, you will be so kind as to share what you know of this brooch. 'Tis, I understand, a matter of some significance. Vassar's smile was a thin crescent, revealing nothing. Significance is a matter of perspective, is it not? To some, it is merely a bauble. To others, a symbol of betrayal. Come, let us not play games. You seek the brooch tied to the Leclerc murder. I can help you, for a price. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He disliked bargaining, especially with men who spoke as if they held all the cards. And what price would that be, monsieur? I am not in the habit of paying for information I can uncover myself. Vassar leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Oh, but you cannot, Monsieur Poirot. Not this time. The brooch is no longer in Bruges. It was sold years ago to a buyer in London, a member of a certain society, the Order of the Saffron Veil, I believe they call themselves. The name struck Poirot like a shard of ice. The Order of the Saffron Veil, a whisper from the dossier, a shadow he had not yet grasped. He kept his face impassive, though his mind raced. You know much, Monsieur Vassar, but I wonder, how does a simple antiquarian come by such knowledge? Vassar chuckled, a sound like dry leaves rustling. Simple? Oh no, monsieur. I am a collector of stories as much as objects. People come to me with their burdens of secrets they cannot bear alone. I listen, I record, and sometimes I trade. The brooch's story is one I acquired from a desperate man, a former member of the order, who fled their ranks. He spoke of a scandal, a murder, and a detective whose name was tied to both. Your name, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot's fingers tightened around his cane. The air in the shop seemed to thicken, the shadows pressing closer. Q. Speak in riddles, monsieur. If you have evidence, produce it. Key. If not, I shall take my leave. Vassar's smile widened, but his eyes remained cold. Evidence. Oh, I have something better. Follow me. He led Poirot through a curtained doorway into a back room, smaller and even more cluttered than the shop. A single candle burned on a table, casting flickering shadows over crates of artifacts and a locked cabinet in the corner. Vassar knelt beside the cabinet, producing a key from his pocket. This, he said, unlocking it, is where I keep the truly valuable items. From the cabinet, he withdrew a small velvet pouch. He tipped its contents onto the table. A single sheet of parchment, yellowed with age, covered in a tight, elegant script. Poirot's breath caught as he recognized the handwriting. It matched the anonymous letter that had brought him to Bruges.
Des,
Vassar said. It's a page from a ledger kept by the order. It records the sale of the sapphire brooch to one of their members in London, along with other details. Details about you, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot's pulse quickened, but he forced his voice to remain steady. And what did these details say? Vassar's eyes gleamed. They say you were deceived in 1905, that you closed the Leclerc case too quickly, trusting a confession that was false. The order knows this, and they have proof they intend to use to ruin you. Poirot's mind whirled, piecing together fragments. The servant's confession, Celeste's lies, the brooch. The order writ was a tapestry of deception, and he was woven into its threads. You will give me this ledger page, he said, his tone brooking no argument. Vassar shook his head. Not so fast, monsieur. I told you, there is a price. I want your word, your honest word, that you will not reveal my involvement. The order is not forgiving to those who betray their secrets. Poirot studied the man, weighing his options. Vassar was an opportunist, but he was no fool. Refusing him could mean losing the ledger page, and with it, a crucial piece of the puzzle. Very well, Poirot said at last. You have my word. But know this, Monsieur Vassar, if you have misled me, I will not be so forgiving. Vassar handed over the parchment, his smile never wavering. A pleasure doing business, Monsieur Poirot. But a word of advice, tread carefully. The order's reach is long, and their patience short. Poirot tucked the parchment into his coat, his mind already racing ahead. The mention of London and the Order of the Saffron Veil opened a new path, one that led far from Bruges' misty streets. But first, he needed to verify Vassar's claims. The ledger page was a start, but it was not enough. He needed to see the order for himself, to understand their motives and their power. As he left the shop, the bell jangling behind him, Poirot felt the weight of unseen eyes. The alley was empty, but the mist seemed to coil tighter, whispering of dangers yet to come. He held a carriage to his hotel, his thoughts consumed by the order, a secret society tied to a 20-year-old murder. Wielding his own past against Hemet was a challenge worthy of his intellect. But first, he needed to infiltrate their ranks. Back at his hotel, a modest but elegant establishment overlooking the Dashford Canal, Poirot spread the ledger page on his desk. The script was meticulous, detailing the brooch's sale to a Lady M.A. in London, along with cryptic references to the Belgian's error and the disgrace to come. The words chilled him, not for their threat, but for their precision. Someone knew the Leclerc case intimately, someone who had been there, or who had access to those who were. He spent the evening poring over maps and timetables, plotting his return to London, but the order's mention of a clandestine meeting in Bruges, noted in the ledger as happening tomorrow night, changed his plans. If he could observe them, even from a distance, he might uncover their true purpose. The location was Vega, House of Stone, by the old bridge, but Poirot's knowledge of Bruges was sharp. The Rosenhold Kai, with its ancient stone buildings and quiet canal, was the likely spot the next night. Poirot, dressed in dark clothing, forsaking his usual impeccable suit for something less conspicuous. He slipped out of the hotel, the fog cloaking his movements as he made his way to the Rosenhold Kai. The canal glimmered under the moonlight, its surface undisturbed, save for the occasional ripple. At the end of the bridge stood a narrow stone house, its windows dark before a faint glow seeping through the shutters. Poirot positioned himself in the shadows of a nearby willow, T's eyes fixed on the house. Figures arrived one by one, cloaked and silent, their faces hidden by hoods. He counted 7, their movements deliberate, as if following a ritual. The door opened, and they slipped inside, the glow briefly intensifying before the shutters closed. Tight, he crept closer, his heart steady despite the risk. A low wall bordered the house's garden, offering a vantage point. He scaled it with surprising agility for a man of his age, crouching behind a hedge. Through a crack in the shutters, he glimpsed a room lit by candles, their flames casting eerie patterns on the walls. The figures stood in a circle, their voices low but distinct. The Belgian must be stopped. One said, a woman's voice, sharp and commanding. His meddling threatens everything. Another voice, male and gravelly, replied, the brooch is secure, but the ledger page is missing. Vassar betrayed us. Poirot's breath caught. Vassar had not lied, but he had underestimated the order's vigilance. The woman spoke again. We proceed as planned. The gala in London will seal Poirot's disgrace. The evidence is ready. Poirot's mind raced. A gala in London, likely the event hosted by Lady Margaret Ashford, a name he'd encountered in his research. The ledger page had mentioned Lady M.A., and now the pieces aligned. A K needed to be at that gala, but first he had to escape. Unnoticed, as he eased back toward the wall, a twig snapped under his foot. The voices inside fell silent. Poirot froze, his pulse hammering. A figure appeared at the window, peering into the darkness. He pressed himself against the hedge, willing the fog to thicken. After a tense moment, the figure retreated, and the murmurs resumed. Poirot slipped away, his heart pounding, but his resolve unshaken. The Order of the Saffron Veil was no myth. They were real, organized, and dangerous. Their mention of his disgrace confirmed the letter's threat. but it also gave him a target. London, Lady Ashford, and the gala. Hi, returned to his hotel, the ledger page burning a hole in his pocket, his mind alight with plans. The next morning, he booked a train to London, his thoughts turning to the gala. Lady Ashford was a formidable woman, known for her wealth and influence. She was part of the order. Infiltrating her circle would be no small feat, but Poirot thrived on such challenges. He would need a disguise, a persona to blend into high society without arousing suspicion. A French diplomat, perhaps, or a retired art collector, something to appeal to Lady Ashford's vanity. As the train sped toward London, Poirot gazed out at the passing fields, the ledger page safely tucked in his valise. Vazir's warning echoed in his mind. The order's reach is long, but Poirot was no stranger to long odds. The sapphire brooch, the Leclerc murder, the order's conspiraciate was a puzzle, and he was its master. He leaned back, a faint smile curving his lips. The game was afoot, and Hercule Poirot was ready to play. Chapter 5. The London Connection. The fog clung to London's streets like a conspirator, shrouding the city in a haze that muffled sound and blurred edges. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the damp chill, adjusted his Homburg hat and stepped out of the hansom cab onto the cobblestones of Mayfair. The gala at Lady Margaret Ashford's mansion promised opulence, intrigue, and most crucially, lead in the shadowy conspiracy that had drawn him back to a 20-year-old murder case in Bruges. The anonymous letter, the sealed dossier, the whispers of the Order of the Saffron Veil pointed to this night, this place. Poirot's mustache twitched as he surveyed the glowing windows of the grand house. He was not here as himself, but as Monsieur Etienne Dubois, a French art collector with a penchant for rare manuscripts. The disguise was subtle, a slight stoop, a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles, and a faint accent that suggested provincial roots. It would hold, he was certain. But Poirot never underestimated the power of the little gray cells to anticipate and adapt. The invitation, procured through a discreet contact at the British Museum, was clutched in his gloved hand. It bore the Ashford crest, a stylized peacock with eyes that seemed to watch him even on paper. Lady Margaret Ashford, a widow of considerable wealth and influence, was rumored to be a high-ranking member of the Saffron Veil, the secret society whose coded references to Poirot's disgrace had set his heart racing in Bruges. The ledger he sought, mentioned in whispers at the order's clandestine meeting, was somewhere within these walls. He would find it, or he would make it reveal itself. The entrance hall was a spectacle of crystal chandeliers and polished marble, alive with the chatter of London's elite. Women in silk gowns glittered like jewels, their laughter sharp and practiced, while men in tailcoats swirled brandy in crystal glasses. Poirot, as Etienne Dubois moved through the crowd with calculated ease, his eyes scanning faces for tells too quick glances, forced smiles, or the subtle tension of someone hiding more than their share of secrets. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner, the notes weaving through the air like threads in a tapestry. He accepted a flute of champagne from a passing waiter, though he had no intention of drinking it. Clarity was his ally tonight. "Madame, Ashford is a vision, is she not?" A voice drawled beside him. Poirot turned to find a young man, no older than 30, with slick back hair and a cravat that screamed new money. His name, Poirot recalled from the guest list, was Charles Wentworth, a financier with a reputation for risky investments. "Indeed," Poirot replied, his accent lilting just enough to sell the persona. "Her elegance is matched only by her reputation for discretion." Wentworth chuckled, swirling his drink. "Discretion, yes. They say she knows everyone's secrets, but shares none of her own. A dangerous woman to cross." Poirot's smile was polite, but his mind catalogued the comment. Dangerous, yes, but how dangerous? And to whom? He excused himself and drifted toward the grand staircase, where a velvet rope barred access to the upper floors. A footman stood guard, his posture rigid, but his eyes distracted by a flirtatious debutante nearby. Poirot waited, timing his moment. When the footman turned to answer the girl's coy question, Poirot slipped past the rope and ascended the stairs, his steps silent on the thick carpet. The upper corridor was dim, lit only by flickering gas lamps. Portraits lined the walls, stern-faced, Ashford's glaring down as if judging his intrusion. Poirot's destination was the library, where, according to his informant, Lady Ashford kept her private papers. The door was locked, but Poirot had anticipated this. From his pocket, he produced a slender pick, a relic from his days as a detective in Brussels. The lock yielded with a soft click, and he stepped inside. The library was a cavern of mahogany and leather, shelves groaning under the weight of tomes. A massive desk dominated the room, its surface cluttered with inkwells, quills, and a single orchid in a crystal vase. Poirot's gloved fingers moved swiftly, opening drawers and sifting through papers. Invitations, bills, letters, nothing of note, until he found a false bottom in the top drawer. His pulse quickened as he pried it open, revealing a slim ledger, bound in black leather. The pages were filled with coded entries, dates, initials, and cryptic phrases like Bruges. 1,905 inches in Leclerc's debt. His name appeared once, underlined in red, Poirot, disgraced. Before he could copy the page, a creak echoed from the hallway. Poirot froze, slipping the ledger into his coat and retreating behind a heavy curtain. The door opened, and Lady Margaret Ashford entered, her emerald gown shimmering in the lamplight. She was tall, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to pierce the shadows. Behind her was a man Poirot didn't recognize, older, with a military bearing and a scar across his left cheek. "You're certain the ledger is secure?" the man asked, his voice low and urgent. "Of course, Colonel," Lady Ashford replied, her tone smooth as silk. "No one suspects its existence, let alone its contents. The order's plans are safe." The Colonel paced, his boots clicking on the floor. And Poirot, he sniffing around Bruges. Vassar sent word. Atiro's heart thudded, but he remained still, barely breathing. Lady Ashford laughed softly. "Poirot is a relic, Colonel. His little gray cells are no match for the veil. If he gets too close, we'll bury him, not just his reputation." The Colonel grunted, unconvinced. "He's cleverer than you think. His dossier in Bruges is a distraction," Lady Ashford cut in. "Henry Leclerc is playing his part perfectly. Poirot will chase ghosts until we're ready to strike." They moved toward the desk, and Poirot's mind raced. Henry Leclerc, the reclusive artist, was no mere bystander. He was orchestrating this, using the dossier to lure Poirot into a trap. But why? And what was the disgrace they planned to pin on him? Colonel opened the desk drawer, his brow furrowing as he found it empty. Lady Ashford's smile vanished. "Impossible," she hissed, searching the drawer herself. "It was here this morning." The Colonel's scar twitched. "We have a thief. Seal the house." Poirot knew his time was short. As the two swept out of the room, calling for the footman, he emerged from the curtain and scanned the library. A panel in the wainscoting caught his eye slightly ajar, as if recently used. He pressed it, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. A hidden room, perhaps. With no time to hesitate, he slipped inside, pulling the panel shut. Behind him, the staircase spiraled down to a small chamber lit by a single oil lamp. The air was musty, thick with the scent of old paper and wax. A table held a scattering of documents, maps, and a single photograph. Antoine Leclerc's mansion in Bruges, its windows dark. Beside it was a list of names, some crossed out, others circled. Poirot's name was there, marked with a question mark. He pocketed the photograph and a single page from the list. his fingers trembling with the thrill of discovery. Footsteps echoed above. Poirot extinguished the lamp and pressed himself against the wall, listening as voices barked orders. The house was being searched, room by room. He needed an exit, and quickly. A small window, high on the wall, offered a chance. It was narrow, but Poirot was not a large man. He climbed onto the table, pushed the window open, and squeezed through, landing in a rose garden behind the mansion. Thorns snagged his coat, but he ignored them, crouching low as he moved toward the street. A shout rang out of footmen spotting movement in the garden. Poirot sprinted, his heart pounding, and ducked into an alley just as lanterns bobbed into view. He straightened, adjusting his spectacles. He resumed his persona as Etienne Du Bois, strolling casually toward the main road. A cab was waiting, its driver half asleep. Poirot climbed in, giving an address far from his true destination. As the cab rattled through the fog, Poirot examined his spoils, the ledger page, the photograph, and the list of names. The ledger confirmed the Saffron Vale's interest in the Leclerc case, with references to payments made to ACL, likely Celeste Leclerc, the widow who had confessed to falsifying evidence. The photograph was more troubling, showing the Bruges mansion with a figure in the window, a woman, her face obscured. The list of names included Sir Thomas Grayson, a Scotland Yard inspector Poirot had worked with years ago. Is Grayson part of this? Cole nodded him, a betrayal he hadn't anticipated. Back at his flat, Poirot spread the documents on his desk, his tisane forgotten as he pieced together the puzzle. Lady Ashford's calm demeanor at the gala, her quick dismissal of his presence, suggested she knew more than she let on. Had she recognized him despite the disguise? The Colonel's mention of Henry Leclerc confirmed the artist's central role, but the motive remained elusive. Was it revenge for the botched case, or something deeper, tied to the sapphire brooch and the disgrace they planned to pin on him? Poirot leaned back, his eyes narrowing. The Saffron Vale was no mere social club. It was a network of power, weaving through Bruges and London, with tendrils reaching into his own past. The ledger page was a start, but he needed more. Quote, Grayson's name on the list was a lead he couldn't ignore. Tomorrow, he would confront the inspector, but tonight, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He had infiltrated the lion's den and emerged with secrets intact. The little gray cells were still sharp, and the game was far from over. He lit a candle, its flame casting shadows on the walls, and began copying the ledger page, his pen moving with precision. Chapter 6. The betrayal unearthed. The London fog clung to the cobblestones like a conspirator, shrouding the city in a haze that mirrored the tangle of secrets Hercule Poirot now carried. His gloved hands gripped a folded page from Lady Margaret Ashford's ledger, its cryptic entries burning in his mind as he navigated the labyrinthine streets toward Belgravia. The ledger's ink, though smudged, had revealed the name Sir Thomas Grayson, man Poirot had once trusted implicitly during the Leclerc case in Bruges 2 decades ago. The revelation that Grayson, a retired Scotland Yard inspector, had suppressed evidence in that long-buried murder case struck Poirot like a blade to the heart. Betrayal, he mused, was a poison that lingered long after the wound was dealt. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of coal smoke and impending rain as Poirot approached Grayson's townhouse. The building loomed, its Georgian facade stately but weathered, much like the man who resided within. Poirot's polished shoes clicked against the steps as he ascended to the door, his mustache twitching with the weight of anticipation. He rapped the brass knocker, its echo sharp in the quiet street, and waited. A housekeeper, her face lined with the weariness of long service, answered. Monsieur Poirot, she asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. Oui, madame. I am here to see Sir Thomas Grayson. It is a matter of some urgency. She hesitated, her eyes darting to the shadows of the hall behind her. then nodded. In the study. Follow me. The interior of the townhouse was a museum of faded glory mahogany, furniture polished to a gleam, yet framed curtains and a faint mustiness betrayed neglect. Poirot's keen eyes noted every detail: a chipped vase on a side table, a portrait of a younger Grayson in his inspector's uniform, its frame slightly askew. The housekeeper led him to a heavy oak door and knocked softly before opening it. "Sir Thomas, Monsieur Poirot, to see you." Grayson sat behind a cluttered desk, his broad shoulders hunched over a glass of amber liquid. His hair, once jet black, was now streaked with silver, and his eyes carried the weight of years spent wrestling with the law's compromises. He looked up, and for a fleeting moment, surprise flickered across his face before settling into a guarded smile. "Poirot," he said, rising stiffly. "It's been an age. To what do I owe this visit?" Poirot removed his hat, placing it carefully on a chair, and fixed Grayson with a gaze that could pierce fog itself. "Gay age. But some matters refuse to remain buried. Have come about. Bruges, 1905. The Leclerc case." Grayson's smile faltered, his hand tightening around the glass. "That's ancient history, Poirot. Why dredge it up now?" "Because, mon ami, history has a way of whispering secrets when one least expects it." Poirot produced the ledger page, unfolding it with deliberate care. "This document, obtained from a most intriguing source, suggests you played a role in concealing the truth of Antoine Leclerc's murder. I would hear your account, Sir Thomas, before I draw conclusions." Grayson's face darkened, and he sank back into his chair, gesturing for Poirot to sit. The housekeeper lingered, but Grayson waved her away. "Leave us, Mrs. Harrow." As the door clicked shut, Poirot settled into a leather armchair, his posture impeccable despite the tension in the room. "Speak, Sir Thomas. What did you hide, and why?" Kisna took a long sip of his drink, the ice clinking against the glass. "You always were relentless, Poirot." "Very well, I'll tell you, but it won't bring you peace." He leaned back, his eyes distant, as if peering through the years to that fateful case. "In 05, I was a rising star at Scotland Yard, seconded to Bruges to assist with the Leclerc investigation. You were young, too sharp as a tack. Even then, the merchant, Antoine Leclerc, was found stabbed in his study, his safe emptied. The servant, Peter, confessed quickly. Too quickly, I thought, but the evidence was tidy blood on his clothes, a knife in his quarters. The case was closed, and we moved on." Poirot's fingers steepled beneath his chin. "And yet, the ledger suggests otherwise. It speaks of evidence, suppressed, of a powerful figure, protected. Who was it, Grayson? And what did you bury?" Grayson's jaw tightened, and he rose, pacing to a bookshelf that spanned the wall. His fingers trailed over the spines, pausing at a worn leather volume. "You want the truth? It's a dangerous thing, Poirot. There was another suspected man with influence, connections that reached into the heart of Brussels and beyond. If I'd pursued him, my career would have ended. My family would have suffered." Poirot's voice was soft but unyielding. "His name, Sir Thomas?" Grayson hesitated, then pulled the book from the shelf, revealing a hidden compartment. From it, he withdrew a small, locked box. "Lord Reginald Carver," he said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. "He was in Bruges at the time, a guest of Leclerc's. There was evidence, a letter, a witness who saw him leave the mansion that night. But Carver's allies in London leaned on the Yard. I was told to make it go away." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And so you did. You let an innocent man, Peter, take the blame." Grayson's hands shook as he unlocked the box, revealing a yellowed photograph and a folded letter. "Not entirely innocent. Peter was involved petty theft. Maybe more, but he wasn't the killer. I made sure his sentence was light. A few years, I thought. I thought it was enough. He slid the photograph across the desk. Poirot lifted it, his breath catching. The image showed a woman in an elegant gown, a sapphire brooch pinned to her chest. She was not Celeste Leclerc, as he had expected, but someone else entirely. Features were striking high cheekbones, dark eyes that seemed to hold a secret. The brooch, with its intricate filigree, was unmistakable. "Who is she?" Poirot asked, his voice steady despite the storm of questions in his mind. "Elise Moreau," Grayson said, "Leclerc's mistress. She was there that night, Poirot. She saw something, but she vanished before we could question her. I was told to let her go too." Poirot's mind raced, piecing together the fragments. Elise Moreau, the opera singer, now a new thread in the tapestry of deceit. The ledger, the brooch, Carver's name, all pointed to a conspiracy that had festered for decades. But why resurface now, and why target him? "You kept this photograph hidden," Poirot said, holding it up. Why? Grayson's shoulders slumped. Guilt, perhaps, or fear. "I knew the truth would come back one day. When I heard you were poking around Bruges again, I feared you'd uncover it all. Someone else knows, Poirot. Someone who wants you ruined." Poirot slipped the photograph into his coat pocket, his expression unreadable. "And this letter?" He gestured to the folded paper still in the box. Grayson hesitated, then handed it over. "It's from Carver to Leclerc, written days before the murder. It mentions a debt and a threat. I couldn't destroy it, but I couldn't use it either." Poirot unfolded the letter, scanning its contents. The words were veiled but menacing, hinting at a financial dispute and a warning to Leclerc to keep silent. It was not proof of murder, but it was a crack in Carver's armor. "You have carried this burden for 20 years, Poirot said, his tone softer now. "Why not come forward sooner?" Grayson laughed bitterly. "You think it's that simple?" Carver's reach was long then, and it's longer now. Even retired, he's untouchable. And the Order of the Saffron Veil Dome looked surprised. "Poirot, I know you've heard of them. They're involved, and they don't forgive." Poirot's mustache twitched, but he betrayed no further reaction. "The Order, I have encountered their shadow. But you, Sir Thomas, have chosen to live in that shadow rather than face the light. That is a choice I cannot forgive." He rose, retrieving his hat. "I will keep this photograph and letter. They are evidence, and I will use them to find the truth. You may yet redeem yourself, Grayson, by aiding me further, or you may remain silent and let the past consume you." Grayson's eyes were hollow. "Be careful, Poirot. Stirring a nest of vipers, mon ami, are no match for the little gray cells." Poirot tipped his hat and turned to leave, but paused at the door. "One last question. The anonymous letter that brought me to Bruges, who sent it?" Grayson shook his head. "I don't know. But if they know about the Leclerc case, they know about you. And they're watching." The door closed behind Poirot, and the fog seemed to thicken as he stepped back into the street. The photograph and letter weighed heavily in his pocket, each a piece of a puzzle that grew more intricate by the hour. Elise Moreau, Lord Reginald Carver. The Order of the Saffron Veil. The threads were converging, but the pattern remained elusive. He hailed a cab, directing the driver to his flat in Whitehaven Mansions. The city blurred past, its lights dimmed by the fog, and Poirot's mind churned. Grayson's betrayal was a wound, but it was also a key. Elise Moreau was alive, or had been, and her connection to the brooch and the murder could unlock the conspiracy's heart. Carver, too, was a figure of interest, a man whose name appeared too often to be coincidence. At his flat, Poirot lit a single lamp and spread the photograph and letter on his desk. The woman in the image gazed back at him, her expression enigmatic. He poured a tisane, the steam curling like the questions in his mind. Who was Elise Moreau, truly? And why had she fled? The letter from Carver hinted at a motive: money, power, silence, but it was not enough. Poirot needed more. He turned to his bookshelf, pulling down a volume on European opera houses. If Elise was an opera singer, there would be records programs, reviews, perhaps a trail to follow. His fingers flipped through the pages, stopping at a mention of a soprano named Elise Moreau, celebrated in Brussels in the early 1900s. A footnote noted her sudden retirement in 1905, the year of the murder. Coincidence? Poirot thought not. The clock struck midnight, and Poirot leaned back, his eyes narrowing. The Order of the Saffron Veil was a shadow over all of this. Their coded messages and clandestine meetings, a web he had only begun to unravel. Lady Ashford's gala, Grayson's confession. And now Elise Moreau were linked, but the why and how remained obscured. He rose, pacing the room, his mind a whirl of deductions. The anonymous letter had been a catalyst, a deliberate prod, to draw him into this maze. Someone wanted him to uncover the truth, to stumble and fall. Henry Leclerc, the grandson, was a possibility, his cryptic paintings and evasive demeanor suspicious. But could he be the mastermind, or was he another pawn? Poirot paused by the window, staring into the fog. The truth was out there, hidden in the murk, and he would find it. The photograph of Elise Moreau, the sapphire brooch gleaming at her throat, was a beacon. He would follow it, to Cornwall or beyond, to the woman who had seen the murder and fled. And he would confront Carver, whose name loomed like a specter. For now, he returned to his desk, penning a note to his old friend Hastings, who was in London on business. Hastings, with his straightforward heart, might offer perspective or, at least, a sounding board. Poirot sealed the note, satisfied with the day's progress, but acutely aware of the danger closing in. The Order was watching, and their reach was long. He sipped his tisane, the warmth grounding him. The betrayal of Grayson stung, but it had yielded truth. Elise Moreau was the next step, and Poirot would find her. The little gray cells, he thought, with a faint smile, were only beginning to work. The night deepened, and Poirot's resolve hardened. The conspiracy would not unravel him. He would unravel it. Chapter 7. The Woman in Blue. The Cornish wind howled like a chorus of restless spirits, clawing at the edges of Hercule Poirot's overcoat as he stepped off the train at St. Ives. The platform was slick with drizzle, the air heavy with salt and secrets. It was October, and the seaside village clung to the cliffs like a forgotten memory, its cobbled streets winding through weathered cottages and shuttered shops. Poirot adjusted his hat, his mustache twitching against the damp chill, and surveyed the scene. Somewhere in this remote outpost, Elise Moreau, the opera singer presumed dead, was hiding under a false name. Her photograph, with the sapphire brooch pinned to her gown, burned in his mind a clue that tethered the past to the present. A thread in the tangled web of the Leclerc murder. He carried Grayson's photograph in his breast pocket, its edges worn from repeated study. The image showed Elise, radiant in her youth, her dark eyes gleaming with a fire that seemed to defy the grainy sepia tones. The brooch, a starburst of sapphires and diamonds, glinted at her throat, a silent witness to the night Antoine Leclerc died. Poirot's little gray cells hummed with anticipation. Elise had seen something that night in 1905, something that drove her to flee Bruges and bury her identity. And now, 20 years later, she held the key to unraveling the conspiracy threatening his reputation. Poirot hailed a rickety cab, its driver, a grizzled man with a face like weathered granite. "To Porthmeor Lane," Poirot said, his voice crisp despite the fatigue of the journey. The driver grunted, eyeing Poirot's polished shoes and immaculate suit with mild suspicion. "Not many visitors this time o' year," he muttered, flicking the reins. The horse clopped forward, and the cab rattled through the mist, past fishing boats bobbing in the harbor and gulls screeching over the slate-gray sea. Porthmeyer Lane was a narrow ribbon of road hugging the cliffside, lined with stone cottages that seemed to lean into the wind. Poirot's research, meticulous as ever, had traced Elise to this address under the name Marie Duval, a widow who kept to herself and rarely ventured into the village. The locals, according to a discreet inquiry through a London contact, described her as a recluse who painted seascapes and sold them through an intermediary in Penzance. But Poirot knew better than to trust appearances. A woman who had once commanded opera houses across Europe, skewed to not vanish into obscurity without reason. The cab stopped at a cottage perched at the lane's end. Its windows shuttered against the storm. Poirot paid the driver, adding a generous tip that earned a surprised nod, and approached the door. It was painted a faded blue, the color of a summer sky long forgotten. He knocked, his gloved hand firm but polite, and waited. The wind carried the faint strains of a gramophone from within Wagner's Tristan und Isolde, its mournful chords weaving through the air like a siren's call. The door creaked open, revealing a woman in her late 50s, her hair a silver cascade pinned loosely at her neck. Her face, though lined with age, retained the sharp beauty of the photograph, high cheekbones, a delicate jaw, and eyes that held a storm of their own. She wore a simple gray dress, but a silk scarf, vibrant with indigo and gold, betrayed flicker of her former elegance. She said, her voice low, tinged with a French accent that had not faded in exile. Madame Duval. Poirot began, bowing slightly. Or perhaps I should say, Madame Elise Moreau. I am Hercule Poirot, and I have come to speak of a matter most delicate concerning a night in Bruges, many years ago. Her eyes widened, a flash of fear crossing her features before she schooled them into a mask of calm. You are mistaken, monsieur, she said, stepping back to close the door. I am Marie Duval. I know no Bruges. Poirot raised a hand, his tone gentle but unyielding. Madame, the sapphire brooch you wore in 1905 does not lie. Nor do the eyes of a woman who has seen too much. I am not here to accuse, but to understand. May I enter? The wind? It is most unkind today. She hesitated, her hand gripping the doorframe. To quietphones. Music swelled. He sold his lament, echoing in the silence between them. Finally, she stepped aside. Come in then, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But know this, some truths are better left buried. The cottage's interior was a study in contrast: sparse furniture, worn but clean, juxtaposed with touches of faded opulence, a crystal chandelier, dulled by dust, and a velvet upholstered chair that looked out of place beside a rough-hewn table. Paintings lined the walls, seascapes in oils and watercolors, Achaia, their waves crashing with a ferocity that seemed to mirror Elise's guarded demeanor. She gestured to a chair, and Poirot sat, placing his hat on the table with deliberate care. You have found me, she said, sitting opposite him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. But why? What do you want with a ghost? Poirot leaned forward, his eyes keen. Madame, I received a letter, anonymous, that speaks of a scandal tied to my pasta case in Bruges, the murder of Antoine Leclerc. Your name, it appears, and the sapphire brooch. I seek the truth, not to harm you, but to protect it. Tell me, what did you see that night? Elise's gaze drifted to the window, where rain lashed the glass. You were young then, she said softly, a detective with fire in your eyes, so certain of justice. I watched you from the shadows, you know, when you came to the Leclerc mansion. I was there, but not as a guest. You were his mistress, Poirot said, not a question, but a statement, delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. She flinched, then nodded. Antoine was complicated, generous, but cruel in his own way. He loved me, or so he said, but he loved his power more. That night, I was in a study, waiting for him. He had promised to give me the brooch as a token of his devotion. But then I heard voices angry, desperate. I hid behind the curtains. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his mind racing. What did you hear, madame? A man, she said, her voice trembling. Not the servant who confessed. This man was educated, his voice smooth, commanding. He argued with Antoine about money, about debts unpaid. There was a struggle, a crash. I saw Antoine fall, blood pooling beneath him. The man stood over him, holding a letter opener, its blade red. I fled through the servants' passage, leaving the brooch behind. I knew if I stayed, I would be next. Poirot's fingers steepled beneath his chin. This man, did you see his face? She shook her head. It was dark, and I was terrified. But his voice, I would know it anywhere. It was not the servant, I swear it. Nor was it Celeste's son, as they claimed. It was someone with power. Someone who could bend the world to his will, and the brooch. Poirot pressed. It was found in the study, was it not? Lisa's lips tightened. I dropped it in my haste. I thought it lost forever. But years later, I heard whispers. In London, in the circles of the wealthy and discreet, the brooch had surfaced, sold through a man named Vassar. I knew then that someone was tying up loose ends, ensuring my silence. Poirot leaned back, his mind weaving the threads together. The anonymous letter, the order of the saffron veil, the brooch's journey from Bruges to London all pointed to a conspiracy that reached beyond a single murder. But Elisa's story held a new piece. A man with a commanding voice, a figure of power. Could it be Lord Reginald Carver, the politician whose name had surfaced in his inquiries? Or was there another player, hidden in the shadows? Madame Poirot said, his tone softening. You have lived in fear for 20 years. Why stay silent? Why not come forward? Her laugh was bitter, sharp as the wind outside. Come forward. To whom? The police, who buried the truth. Newspapers, who would feast on my ruin. I was an opera singer, monsieur, not a saint. My life was already scandal enough, and the man I heard, he was not one to cross. K. fled to Cornwall, changed my name, and prayed the past would forget me. Poirot nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. And yet, the past, it has a way of finding us. Tell me, madame, do you keep a diary, perhaps, recorded that night, or of the years since? Her gaze flickered, a telltale sign. Why do you ask? Because, madame, the truth is often written, even when it is not spoken. A diary may hold details your memory has blurred. If you permit me, I would examine it. Elise rose, her movements slow, deliberate. She crossed to a bookshelf, its shelves sagging under the weight of old volumes and sketchbooks. From behind a copy of Madame Bovary, she retrieved a slim leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. I wrote this in the months after I fled, she said, handing it to him. But be warned, monsieur, it is not a story of heroes, only of fear and survival. Poirot took the diary, his gloved fingers tracing its worn cover. Merci, madame. I will treat it with the respect it deserves. But one question more. This man, the one with the commanding voice, if you heard him again, would you know him? Eyes met his, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. Yes, she whispered. God help me, I would. Poirot rose, tucking the diary into his coat. Then we shall see, madame. I will return, and perhaps, together, we will lay this ghost to rest. As he stepped back into the storm, the diary heavy in his pocket, Poirot felt a surge of satisfaction. Elisa's testimony was a breakthrough, a crack in the conspiracy's armor. But the mention of a powerful man, A voice that could bend the world sent a chill through him. The Order of the Saffron Veil, Lord Carver. And now, this shadowy figure, each piece fit, yet the puzzle was far from complete. He glanced back at the cottage, its blue door a beacon in the mist, and vowed to return. The truth, he knew, was close, but it was a truth that would not come quietly. The train back to London was a rattling beast, its compartments dim and smoky. Poirot sat alone, the diary open on his lap, its pages filled with Elisa's elegant, looping script. The entries were fragmented, written in a mix of French and English, as if her thoughts could not settle on one language. He read by the flickering light of the carriage lamp, his mind piecing together her account. October 12th, 1905. I cannot sleep. The blood, it stains my dreams. Antoine's eyes, open, staring at nothing. The man's voice, so cold, so certain. He spoke of a debt, of a promise, broken. I should have stayed, should have screamed, but fear is a cruel master. The brooch is gone, my only proof. I am nothing now, a shadow running from shadows. November 3rd, 1905. London is a labyrinth, but it does not hide me. I hear whispers of the brooch, of men who trade in secrets. They call themselves an order, cloaked in saffron and lies. I saw their symbol once, in Antoine's Studia veil, embroidered in gold. They know I was there. They will find me. January 19th, 1906. I am Marie. Now, Marie Duval, a name as plain as this village. The sea is my only companion, its roar drowning out the past. But last night, a man came to the market, asking questions. His voice, cannot be sure, will not write his name, for to write it is to summon him. Poirot closed the diary, his mind alight with possibilities. The Order of the Saffron Veil, mentioned in Elisa's trembling hand, confirmed his suspicions. But the man she feared, the one whose voice haunted her, was he Carver or someone higher still? The singed letter from Carver's estate, still tucked in his valise, might hold the answer. He would need to decode its cryptic references, cross-reference them with Elisa's diary, and confront the politician himself. The train lurched, and Poirot glanced out the window. The Cornish coast was a blur of cliffs and sea, wild and untamed. He thought of Elise, alone in her cottage, her paintings a cry against the silence she had imposed on herself. She was no mere witness. She was a survivor, her courage forged in fear. Poirot's resolve hardened. He would protect her, and he would unmask the man who had driven her into hiding. Back in London, the city greeted him with its usual cacophony: car horns, street vendors, the clatter of trams. Poirot returned to his flat, the diary and letter laid out on his desk like artifacts of a lost civilization. He lit a lamp, poured a tisane, and began to work. The letter, partially burned, mentioned a council of 3 within the saffron veil, a triumvirate that orchestrated the conspiracy. One name stood out, scrawled in haste: R.C. Lord Reginald Carver, perhaps? Or another, yet to be uncovered. Poirot's fingers drummed the desk, a rhythm to match his racing thoughts. Elisa's diary hinted at a man of power, a voice that commanded obedience. Carver, a retired MP, fit the profile, but so did others in the Order's orbit. The ledger page from Lady Ashford's gala, with its coded references to Bruges, suggested a network that spanned decades and borders. Poirot's reputation, it seemed, was a pawn in a game far larger than one murder. He turned to the diary again, flipping to a later entry. March 15th, 1910. I saw him today, in Penzance. Not his face, but his voice, carried on the wind. He spoke of a vote, a law to be passed. I hid in the crowd, my heart a drum. He is still out there, and I am still running. A politician, then. Carver had been an MP in 1910, his influence at its peak. But the order's leader, Henry Leclerc, could not be discounted. His cryptic paintings, his evasive demeanor, could he have been the man in the study? Too young then, but cunning enough to manipulate the truth. Poirot's mind spun, each clue a thread in a tapestry of deceit. He stood, pacing the room. The next step was clear. Confront Carver, but not without preparation. The singed letter mentioned a meeting set for tomorrow night in a London warehouse. Poirot would be there, unseen, listening. If Carver was the man Elise feared, his voice would betray him, and, if not, the order's leader would reveal himself in time. Poirot paused at the window. The city's lights, a constellation of secrets. He thought of Elise, her silver hair and haunted eyes, and of the brooch, a sapphire star that had sparked this chase. The truth was close, he could feel it, but it was the truth that demanded caution. The Order of the Saffron Veil was watching, and Poirot, for all his brilliance, was only one man. He returned to his desk, pen in hand, and began to draft a letter to Hastings, his old friend. If the warehouse meeting turned dangerous, he would need an ally. The words flowed, precise and urgent, as the clock ticked toward midnight. Poirot smiled, a small, satisfied curve of his lips. The game was afoot, and Hercule Poirot was never outplay. Chapter 8. The politician's gambit the heir in Lord Reginald. Carver's estate hung heavy with the scent of old money and older secrets. The sprawling manor, nestled in the rolling hills of Kent, loomed like a monument to faded glory, its ivy-clad walls whispering of a time when power was wielded with a velvet glove. Hercule Poirot, his polished shoes clicking softly on the gravel drive, adjusted his Homburg hat and surveyed the scene. The evening sky was bruised with clouds, and a chill wind tugged at his overcoat, as if warning him to turn back. Poirot, ever the hunter of truth, pressed forward, spine sharp as a blade. The singed letter he'd retrieved from Elise Moreau's diary was tucked securely in his breast pocket, its cryptic words burned into his memory. The saffron veil protects its own. Carver holds the key, but the lock is in Bruges. It was a tantalizing clue, one that had led him here, to the doorstep of a man whose name carried weight in the corridors of Westminster and the shadows of the order. Lord Carver, retired member of Parliament, was no ordinary suspect. His charm, his connections, and his rumored ties to the saffron veil made him a formidable adversary. Poirot's mustache twitched as he considered the challenge. Mon Dieu, he thought, this is no game for amateurs. The butler, a gaunt man with eyes like polished flint, ushered Poirot into the grand foyer. Marble gleamed underfoot, and a chandelier cast fractured light across portraits of stern-faced carvers glaring down from centuries past. "His lordship is expecting you," the butler said, his voice as cold as the stone walls. Poirot inclined his head, his expression serene, but his senses were alert. Cataloging every detail, the faint smell of cigar smoke, the distant clink of crystal cage, the soft creak of a floorboard somewhere above. Lord Carver awaited him in the drawing-room, a cavernous space lined with bookshelves and dominated by a roaring fireplace. The man himself stood by a mahogany table, pouring amber liquid from a decanter into 2 glasses. He was tall, silver-haired, with a kind of effortless elegance that came from a lifetime of privilege. His eyes, a piercing blue, met Poirot's with a mixture of amusement and wariness. "Monsieur Poirot," Carver said, his voice smooth as silk, "an unexpected pleasure. Trust your journey from Cornwall was not too taxing." Poirot smiled thinly, removing his gloves with deliberate care. "The journey, it was nothing, Lord Carver. But the purpose, that is most intriguing. Will forgive me if I dispense with pleasantries, okay? I'm here about a matter of some delicacy." Carver's smile didn't falter, but his fingers tightened briefly around his glass. "Delicacy. You flatter me. You sit and tell me what brings the great Hercule Poirot, to my humble abode. Poirot settled into a leather armchair, his posture impeccable. Humble is not the word I would choose, mon ami, nor is innocent. He produced the cinched letter, holding it just out of Carver's reach. This document, it speaks of you, and of a certain sapphire brooch, once belonging to Antoine Leclerc. You know of it. N'est-ce pas? Carver's expression flickered, a shadow crossing his face before the mask of composure returned. A brooch. I'm afraid you'll have to be more specific. My late wife was fond of jewelry, and I've gifted many pieces over the years. Sentimental trinkets, nothing more. Sentimental, perhaps, Poirot said, his voice low and measured. But this trinket, it is tied to a murder in Bruges, 1905. A murder you may know more about than you claim. Tell me, Lord Carver, what is your connection to the Order of the Saffron Veil? The room seemed to grow colder. The fires crackled suddenly loud in the silence. Carver took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving Poirot's. The Saffron Veil sounds like something out of a penny dreadful. I'm a politician, Poirot, not a character in one of your mysteries. Poirot leaned forward, his gaze piercing. And yet, your name appears in their ledgers. Your influence, it casts a long shadow. The brooch, it was no gift to your wife. It was given to Elise Moreau, was it not? A woman who witnessed a murder and fled, leaving behind a trail of secrets you have worked very hard to bury. Carver set his glass down with a deliberate clink. You tread dangerous ground, Poirot. Accusations like that require proof, not theatrics. Elise Moreau, I haven't heard that name in decades. If she's alive, as you imply, perhaps you should ask her what she knows. Oh, I have, Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild. And her diary, it is most illuminating. Speaks of a man of power, a man who promised her safety in exchange for silence, a man who, perhaps, feared what she might reveal about the Leclerc murder. That man, Lord Carver, I believe to be you. Carver laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that echoed off the walls. You're grasping, Poirot, a diary, a letter. These are scraps, not evidence. You think you can waltz into my home and unravel a conspiracy with nothing but conjecture? I expected better from you. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Conjecture? Nan, the little gray cells, they do not conjecture. They observe, they deduce, they know. And they tell me that you are at the heart of this, the Saffron Veil. They protect their own, as the letter says. But what do they protect you from? A scandal? A crime? Or perhaps a truth that would bring your world crashing down? Carver's composure cracked, just for a moment. His hand twitched toward a silver cigarette case on the table, then stilled. You're a clever man, Poirot, he said quietly. But cleverness can be a liability. Some truths are better left buried. Before Poirot could respond, a faint smell reached his nostrils, sharp, unlike the wood smoke from the fireplace. His instincts flared, and he rose swiftly, his eyes darting to the door. What is this smell, Lord Carver? It is not the scent of hospitality. Carver frowned, sniffing the air. I don't. His words were cut off by a sudden, muffled whoosh from the hallway. A tongue of flame licked under the door, followed by a billow of black smoke. The room erupted into chaos as the fire spread with unnatural speed, devouring the curtains and creeping along the bookshelves. Mon Dieu, Poirot exclaimed, seizing his cane and moving toward the door. This is no accident. Carver, pale but composed, grabbed a poker from the fireplace. This way, he shouted, leading Poirot toward a side exit. The smoke was thick now, stinging. Poirot's eyes and throat. He clutched the letter tightly, his mind racing. A trap, a distraction, or a desperate act to destroy evidence. They burst into a narrow corridor, flames licking at their heels. Carver shoved open a door, revealing a spiral staircase descending into darkness. "My study," he gasped. "We can escape through the garden." Poirot followed, his heart pounding but his mind clear. The study was a cluttered sanctum, filled with papers, artifacts, and a massive oak desk. As Carver fumbled with the window latch, Poirot's eyes fell on a small safe, its door ajar. Inside, a glint of blue caught his attention. The sapphire brooch nestled among documents. He reached for it, but Carver's hand clamped onto his wrist. "Don't," Carver hissed, his face taut with something like fear. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." "Then explain it," Poirot snapped, wrenching his arm free. The fire roared closer, the heat searing. He grabbed the brooch and a handful of papers, stuffing them into his coat. "You wish to live, Lord Carver? You will come with me now." Carver hesitated, then nodded, his jaw tight. They scrambled through the window into the garden, the night air a shock after the inferno. Behind them, the study erupted in flames, the crackle of burning wood mingling with the distant wail of sirens. Poirot clutched the brooch and papers, his pulse racing but his resolve unshaken. They reached the edge of the estate, where a low wall separated them from the open fields. Carver, panting, turned to Poirot. "You've made a mistake, Poirot. That brooch is cursed. The people who want it will stop at nothing." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Then they will find that Hercule Poirot is not so easily stopped. Tell me, Lord Carver, who is the leader of the Saffron Veil? Who orchestrates this conspiracy?" Carver's laugh was bitter. "You think I'm the mastermind? I'm a pawn, Poirot. A well-placed pawn, but a pawn nonetheless. The leader, you'll find them in Bruges. But be warned, they know you're coming." Before Poirot could press further, a shadow moved in the darkness, a figure, cloaked and swift, darting toward them. Poirot's cane flashed up, but the figure was faster, a blade gleaming in the moonlight. Carver cried out, clutching his arm as blood bloomed through his sleeve. The attacker vanished into the night, leaving Poirot to support the staggering lord. "Vite, vite," Poirot urged, half-dragging Carver toward the road where a car's headlights pierced the gloom. The driver, a groundskeeper, alerted by the fire, helped them inside. As the car sped toward safety, Poirot examined the singed papers in his hand. One bore a name, Henry Leclerc, the grandson, the artist, the man whose cryptic paintings had haunted Poirot's investigation from the start. Poirot leaned back, the brooch heavy in his pocket, his mind alight with new connections. The fire, the attack, Carver's words, they all pointed to Bruges, to the heart of the Saffron Veil. He was closer than ever, but the danger was greater too. The little gray cells, they must work faster, he thought, his lips curving into a determined smile. The game, it is not yet over. The journey back to London was a blur of rain-slicked roads and Carver's labored breathing. The lord, bandaged but silent, refused to speak further, his eyes fixed on some distant point. Poirot, ever observant, noted the man's clenched fists, the faint tremor in his jaw. Fear, guilt, or both? The answer lay in Bruges, and Poirot would not rest until he found it at his flat. Poirot spread the singed papers across his desk, the sapphire brooch glinting under the lamplight. The documents were a mix of letters, ledgers, and cryptic notes, many bearing the Saffron Veil's symbol, a stylized saffron flower encircled by thorns. One letter, written in a hurried scrawl, stood out. The disgrace must be buried. Poirot persists, ensure he follows Leclerc's fate. Poirot's mustache twitched. Leclerc's fate, the merchant's murder, the servant's false confession, the brooch, the order all threads in a tapestry of deception. And Henry Leclerc, the grandson, was no mere bystander. His paintings, his evasiveness, his connection to the order, they pointed to a man driven by more than artistic passion. Vengeance, perhaps, or something deeper, darker. Poirot sipped his tisane, the warmth steadying his nerves. The fire at Carver's estate was no accident. He was certain. Someone had known he was coming, had anticipated his move. The cloaked attacker, the swift-bladed, was a warning, but also a mistake. They fear me, Poirot thought, and in their fear, they revealed themselves. He turned to the brooch, its sapphire catching the light like a frozen tear. Lise had said it was left behind the night of the murder, a silent witness to the crime. But why had it surfaced now, after 20 years? And why was Carver, a man of power and poise, so rattled by its mention? Caro's fingers traced the intricate setting, his mind piecing together the puzzle. Caro was not just a jewelette, was a symbol, a key to the Saffron Vale's secrets. A knock at the door startled him. It was Hastings, his old friend, his face flushed with concern. "Poirot, I heard about the fire. Are you all right? Ain't what the devil's going on?" Poirot waved a hand, his expression calm, but his eyes alight. "Mon cher Hastings, I am quite well, though the night has been eventful. Sit, and I shall explain. But first, tell me, have you ever heard of a secret society called the Saffron Vale?" Hastings blinked, his brow furrowing. "Can't say I have. Sounds like something out of one of those adventure novels." "Is this tied to your Bruges business?" "Precisement," Poirot said, leaning forward. "And it is no novel, Hastings. It is a conspiracy, one that stretches from a murder in 1905 to a fire this very night. Carver, he is involved, but he is not the master. The true leader, I believe, is in Bruges, and I must go to them before they come for me." Hastings paled. "Go to them, Poirot. You can't be serious. There, setting fires and sending knife-wielding lunatics after you. Then they are desperate." Poirot interrupted, his voice firm. "In desperation, Hastings, is the crack through which the truth slips. Have the brooch, the papers, and now a name, Henry Leclerc, the grandson of the murdered merchant. He is the key, I am certain." Hastings shook his head, exasperated. "You're impossible, Poirot, okay? But if you're set on this, I'm coming with you. Someone's got to keep you out of trouble." Poirot's smile was genuine, though tinged with weariness. "Your loyalty, it is appreciated, mon ami. But this journey, it is mine alone. The Saffron Vale, they know my name, my past. They seek to unravel Hercule Poirot, but they will find that I am not so easily undone." As Hastings protested, Poirot's gaze drifted to the window, where the London night pressed against the glass. Bruges awaited, with its cobblestone streets and shadowed secrets. Henry Leclerc, the Saffron Vale, the truth of 1905, they were all there, waiting to be unmasked. And Poirot, with his brooch, his papers, and his indomitable little gray cells, was ready to face them. He rose, his movements brisk. "Come, Hastings, there is much to do before I depart. The game, it is afoot, and Hercule Poirot does not lose." Chapter 9. The Saffron Vale Unraveled. The fog clung to Bruges like a conspirator, shrouding the ancient city in a veil of secrets. Hercule Poirot stood before the derelict cathedral of St. Martin, its Gothic spires clawing at the mist, a silent sentinel of forgotten sins. The singed letter he'd salvaged from Lord Carver's burning study trembled in his gloved hand, its cryptic directions leading him here to the heart of the Order of the Saffron Vale. His gray cells hummed with anticipation, but a chill of unease lingered. The Order knew too much, the whispers of his disgrace too precise. Tonight, he would unmask their leader and dismantle the conspiracy, threatening to unravel his legacy. The cathedral's doors, warped by time, groaned as Poirot pushed them open. Inside, darkness swallowed the vast nave, broken only by flickering candlelight that danced across chipped frescoes and broken pews. The air was thick with incense, its cloying sweetness masking something fouler, metallic tints, like blood long spilled. Poirot's polished shoes clicked softly on the cracked stone floor as he moved deeper, his silhouette merging with the shadows. He adjusted his mustache, a ritual to steady his nerves, and clutched the letter tighter. Its final line burned in his mind. At midnight, the saffron veil gathers where the saints weep. He glanced at his pocket, watch 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes to prepare. The cathedral silence was deceptive, a predator lying in wait. Poirot's eyes darted to the galleries above, where moonlight pierced broken stained glass, casting jagged patterns of red and gold. A faint murmur reached him, a low chant weaving through the pillars. He followed it, his cane tapping rhythmically, a metronome to his racing thoughts. The dossier, the brooch, Elise's diary. Grayson's betrayal, all threads converged here in this forsaken place. The chanting grew louder, guiding him to a spiral staircase descending into the crypt. He hesitated, his hand grazing the cold iron railing. The order was no mere secret society. Their reach spanned Bruges to London, entwining politicians, aristocrats, and ghosts of his past. The name Henry Leclerc pulsed in his mind, the reclusive artist, grandson of the murdered Antoine Leclerc, whose cryptic paintings and evasive demeanor had haunted Poirot since their meeting. Could Henry be the mastermind orchestrating this vendetta to avenge his family's shame? Poirot descended, each step echoing like a heartbeat. The crypt opened into a vast chamber, its walls lined with ancient sarcophagi, their stone faces eroded into grimaces. At the center stood a circular altar, draped in saffron-colored silk, surrounded by 12 cloaked figures in golden masks. Their chant, in a tongue Poirot didn't recognize, vibrated with menace. He slipped behind a sarcophagus, his black overcoat blending with the darkness, and observed. The figures moved in ritualistic precision, placing objects on the altar. Sapphire brooch, glinting like a fallen star. A faded photograph of a woman in blue. And a dossier, its cover marked with Poirot's initials. His breath caught. The dossier was the one Madame Dubois had shown him, sealed with secrets from his youth. The photograph was Elise Moreau, the opera singer who'd fled the Leclerc murder. The brooch tied them all together, a symbol of guilt and greed. The order wasn't just taunting him, they were preparing to expose him, to twist his past into a weapon. But why? And who led them? A 13th figure emerged from the shadows, taller than the rest, their cloak embroidered with saffron threads that shimmered like veins of gold. The leader. Their mask was more ornate, its edges curling like flames. They raised a hand, silencing the chant, and spoke in a voice that cut through the crypt like a blade. Tonight, we unveiled the truth, the leader said, their tone low but resonant. Hercule Poirot, the great detective, will fall. His disgrace, buried in Bruges, will be our triumph. The world will see him for what he is, a fraud, a keeper of lies. Poirot's heart thudded, but his mind sharpened. The leader's voice was familiar, its cadence echoing Henry Leclerc's terse replies at the estate. He needed proof, not suspicion. He scanned the chamber, noting a narrow ledge above the altar, accessible via a crumbling staircase. If he could reach it, he'd have a vantage point to observe undetected and, perhaps, unmask the leader. He moved silently, his small frame an advantage in the shadows. The staircase was treacherous, its steps worn to slick curves, but Poirot's agility belied his age. He reached the ledge, crouching behind a broken statue of a weeping saint. Below, the ritual continued. The leader lifted the dossier, opening it to reveal pages Poirot hadn't seen, letters forged in his handwriting, accusing him of suppressing evidence in the 1905 Leclerc case to protect a corrupt official. Lies, meticulously crafted, but convincing enough to ruin him. The leader's voice rose. These documents will be sent to every newspaper in Europe. Poirot's name will be synonymous with shame. But first, we honor the one who suffered D'Antoine Leclerc, betrayed by those he trusted. The cloaked figures bowed, their masks glinting. Poirot's mind raced. The forged letters were a masterstroke, but they required intimate knowledge of his early career. Only someone with access to police archives or a personal vendetta who have crafted them. Henry Leclerc, with his family's pain and artistic obsession, fit the profile. But Poirot needed more than intuition. He noticed a small leather satchel at the leader's feet, half open, revealing a glint of metal, a weapon, or something else. He had to act. The police, alerted by a discreet call from his hotel, were en route, but they'd arrived too late to stop the ritual's climax. Poirot's eyes fell on a loose stone in the statue's base. An idea formed a risky one, but Poirot thrived on precision. He pried the stone free, its weight heavy in his hand, and waited. The leader raised the sapphire brooch, its facets catching the candlelight. "This is our symbol," they declared. The heart of the Leclerc legacy, stolen by greed, reclaimed by justice. Poirot hurled the stone, aiming not for the leader, but for the altar's edge, where a tall candelabrum stood. Struck true, toppling the candelabrum into the saffron drapery. Flames erupted, licking the silk, and chaos ensued. The cloaked figures scattered, their chants turning to shouts. The leaders spun, their masks slipping slightly, revealing a flash of pale skin and dark eyes. Poirot seized the moment. He descended the ledge, his cane a silent ally, and reached the altar. He snatched the dossier and photograph, tucking them into his coat, but the satchel was gone and the leader had grabbed it in the chaos. Smoke thickened, stinging his eyes, but Poirot's focus was unshakable. He moved toward the leader, who was barking orders to douse the flames. "Enough." Poirot's voice rang out, clear and commanding, despite the pandemonium. The figures froze, their masks turning toward him. The leader stiffened, their hand clutching the satchel. Poirot stepped into the candlelight, his silhouette unmistakable. "You speak of disgrace, but it is you who hide behind masks. Reveal yourself, Henry Leclerc, and face the truth." The leader laughed, a cold, jagged sound. "Bold, monsieur." "Poirot, but foolish. You think you know me?" They pulled back their hood, letting the mask fall. Henry Leclerc's face stared back, his sharp features twisted with rage and triumph. His dark hair was slicked back, his eyes burning with the intensity Poirot had glimpsed at the estate. "I am no mere artist," Henry spat. "I am the reckoning of my family's pain. You buried the truth about my grandfather's murder, protected the guilty to climb your precious ladder of fame. Now you'll pay." Poirot's expression remained serene, though his mind catalogued every detail. Henry's trembling hands, the satchel's bulge, the desperation in his voice. "You are mistaken, Monsieur Leclerc. I protected no one." The servant's confession was coerced? Yes, but not by me. Your conspiracy is built on lies, and I shall prove it. Henry lunged, drawing a slender dagger from the satchel. Poirot sidestepped, his cane hooking Henry's wrist with practiced ease. The dagger clattered to the stone floor, and Henry stumbled, his mask of control cracking. The other figures hesitated, their loyalty wavering as the flames grew, casting wild shadows. "You cannot stop us," Henry hissed, scrambling for the satchel. "The letters are already dispatched. Your ruin is inevitable." Poirot's smile was thin, but unwavering. "You underestimate Hercule Poirot. The police are at the gates, and your letters are forgerously disproved by my own records. Your saffron veil is nothing but a shroud of delusion." As if on cue, the cathedral doors above thundered open, and the clatter of boots echoed through the nave. Inspector Verhagen, whom Poirot had contacted, shouted commands. The cloaked figures panicked, some fleeing toward hidden exits, others dropping their masks in surrender. Henry snarled, grabbing the satchel and bolting for a side passage. Poirot pursued, his small frame darting through the smoke. The passage led to a narrow tunnel, its walls slick with damp. Henry's footsteps echoed ahead, his breath ragged. Poirot's heart pounded, but his resolve was iron. He couldn't let Henry escape, not with the satchel. It likely held more evidence. The tunnel opened into a courtyard, the fog thicker now, swallowing the moonlight. Henry stood at its center, clutching the satchel, his face a mask of defiance. "You'll never take me, Poirot. The order will rise again." Poirot stepped forward, his voice calm but unyielding. "Your order is finished, Henry. Your grandfather's murder was a tragedy, but your vengeance has twisted you. Surrender, and the truth may yet redeem you." Henry's laugh was bitter. He reached into the satchel, pulling out a small pistol. Poirot froze, his hand tightening on his cane. But before Henry could aim, a figure emerged from the fog. Inspector Verheegen, his revolver drawn. "Drop it, Leclerc," Verheegen barked. Henry's eyes flickered, calculating. Then, with a cry of rage, he hurled the satchel at Poirot and fled into the fog. Poirot caught the satchel, its weight reassuring, and nodded to Verheegen. "After him, Inspector." "I have what I need." Verheegen vanished into the mist, his men fanning out. Poirot opened the satchel, finding a ledger, more forged letters, and a small journal Henry's, detailing his obsession with avenging Antoine Leclerc. Each entry dripped with hatred. Not just for Poirot, but for a world that had forgotten his family's pain. The police raid dismantled the order's remnants, unmasking its members, minor nobles, disgraced officials, and a few desperate souls. Drawn to Henry's charisma, Poirot returned to his hotel, the satchel under his arm, the dossier and photograph safe in his coat. He sat by the window, the fog pressing against the glass, and lit a cigarette, a rare indulgence. He'd unmasked Henry, stopped the ritual, and preserved his reputation. But the victory was bittersweet. The Leclerc case reopened with Elise's testimony would finally seek justice, but the cost of buried truths weighed on him. Henry's pain was real, his methods monstrous. Poirot exhaled, watching the smoke curl like a question mark. He sipped his tisane, the familiar ritual grounding him. The Order of the Saffron Veil was no more, but its shadow lingered, a reminder that even the great Hercule Poirot could not escape the ghosts of his past. Yet, as the fog began to lift, he allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The truth, however fragile, had prevailed. Chapter 10. The Final Reckoning. The rain tapped a gentle rhythm against the windows of Hercule Poirot's London flat, a soft counterpoint to the crackling fire in the hearth. The room, with its polished mahogany furniture and neatly arranged bookshelves, exuded an air of quiet triumph. Poirot sat in his favorite armchair, a delicate porcelain cup of tisane balanced in his hand, its steam curling upward like a wisp of thought. The case was closed. Henry Leclerc was in custody, the Order of the Saffron Veil dismantled, and the long-buried truth of the 1905 Leclerc murder had been dragged into the light. Yet, as the amber glow of the fire danced across the room, Poirot's mind lingered not on victory but on the fragility of truth itself, truth he had chosen to bury once more. The dossier, a damning collection of papers that had lured him to Bruges, now lay in ashes in the grate. He had burned it an hour ago, watching the flames consume the secrets of his youth, secrets that, while not criminal, carried the weight of choices made in haste, alliances forged in naivety, and a case that had shaped the detective he had become. The anonymous letter, penned by Henry Leclerc in a final act of vengeance, had sought to unravel Poirot's legacy. It had failed, but not without leaving a mark. As he sipped his tisane, the faint bitterness of chamomile mirrored the undercurrent. of unease that lingered in his thoughts. The clock on the mantel struck 9, its chime a soft reminder of the world beyond his sanctuary. London was alive outside, its streets buzzing with the chaos of post-war optimism. Motorcars honking and the distant laughter of late-night revelers. But here, in the stillness of his flat, Poirot felt the weight of solitude. Not loneliness, never. That but a deliberate isolation that allowed his mind to sift through the intricacies of the case one final time. The journey had begun with that letter, its elegant script, a taunt from the shadows. It had spoken of a disgrace tied to his early days as a detective in Bruges, a case he had thought long forgotten. The murder of Antoine Leclerc, a wealthy merchant, had seemed straightforward at the time. A servant's confession, a quick conviction, and a case closed. But the letter had hinted at a deeper truth. A conspiracy that stretched from the cobblestone alleys of Bruges to the glittering salons of London's elite. Poirot had followed the trail, each step revealing a layer of deception: Madame de Bois's sealed dossier, Henry Leclerc's cryptic paintings, Celeste Leclerc's tearful confession, and the shadowy dealings of the Order of the Saffron Veil. He set the cup down, his fingers tracing the armrest's smooth grain. The Order had been the heart of it all, a secret society woven into the fabric of power, its members bound by greed and vengeance. Henry Leclerc, the grandson of the murdered merchant, had orchestrated the plot, driven by a twisted desire to avenge his family's tarnished name. The sapphire brooch, that elusive heirloom, had been the thread that connected the past to the present, its trail leading Poirot through a labyrinth of lies to the truth. The real killer, a powerful politician shielded by corruption, and a young Poirot who had been too green to see the strings being pulled. The fire popped, sending a spark skittering across the hearth. Poirot's gaze drifted to the small table beside him, where a single sheet of paper rested, a letter he had written, but not yet sent. It was addressed to Captain Arthur Hastings, his old friend, who was currently in Argentina, blissfully unaware of the storm Poirot had weathered. The letter was not a confession, nor a plea for understanding, but a reflection on the nature of truth and the choices that define a man. He had not decided whether to send it. Perhaps he never would. A knock at the door startled him from his reverie. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his instincts sharpening. Visitors at this hour were rare, and after the events of the past weeks, he trusted no one implicitly. He rose, adjusting his waistcoat, and crossed the room with the measured steps of a man accustomed to control. Opening the door, he found Mrs. Clara Hudson, his landlady, holding a silver tray with a single envelope. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Poirot," she said, her voice warm but tinged with curiosity. "This came for you just now. A boy delivered." It said it was urgent. Poirot took the envelope, his fingers brushing the crisp paper. "Mercy, Mrs. Hudson. You are, as always, most efficient." She smiled, lingering a moment as if hoping for a hint of the envelope's contents. But Poirot's polite nod sent her retreating down the stairs. He closed the door and examined the envelope. No return address, no postmark, just his name in a bold, unfamiliar hand. His heart quickened, a faint echo of the dread he had felt when the first anonymous letter arrived. Seating himself at his desk, he slit the envelope with the letter opener, its blade gleaming in the lamplight. Inside was a single sheet, the handwriting precise but hurried, as if written under duress. "Monsieur Poirot, the game is not over. You have unmasked one player, but the board is vast, and the stakes are higher than you know. Look to the east, where the dawn hides its secrets. You will find me in Istanbul, if you dare to follow." A friend of truth. Poirot's lips pressed into a thin line. The phrase, "a friend of truth," was a barb, a mockery of his pursuit of justice. Istanbul, the word conjured images of minarets, piercing the sky. Bazaars, alive with color, in a city where East met West in a dance of secrets. He leaned back, his mind racing. Henry Leclerc was in custody, the saffron veil shattered. Yet this letter suggested a deeper conspiracy, one that had not ended with a raid on the Bruges Cathedral. He rose and paced the room, his small, precise steps a counterpoint to the storm in his mind. The case had been personal, a threat to his reputation, but this new missive hinted at something larger network that extended beyond London and Bruges, perhaps beyond Europe itself. The reference to the East was vague, deliberately so, but Istanbul was a city of crossroads, a place where secrets were traded like spices. Someone was baiting him. They knew him well, knew his curiosity, his need to resolve the unresolved. The fire had dwindled to embers, and Poirot paused to stoke it, the poker cold in his hand. He considered his options. He could ignore the letter, dismiss it as a prank or a final jab from a defeated enemy. He could burn it, as he had the dossier, and return to the quiet life he had earned. Or he could follow the trail, as he always had, into the unknown. A memory surfaced, unbidden a moment from his youth in Bruges, standing in the rain outside the Leclerc mansion. He had been so certain then, so sure of his deductions, only to learn years later that he had been a pawn in a larger game. That case had taught him humility, the understanding that even the sharpest mind could be blinded by ambition. He would not make that mistake again. He returned to his desk and penned a brief note to Inspector Japp at Scotland Yard, requesting discreet inquiries into any known associates of the Saffron Veil who might have ties to Istanbul. Japp, ever reliable, would grumble but comply. Poirot then drafted a second note, this one to his friend Mr. Fournier, a contact in the French Street with connections in the Levant. If there was a trail in Istanbul, Fournier's network would uncover its first threads. The clock struck 10, and Poirot felt the weight of the hour. He was no longer the young detective of Bruges, eager to prove himself. He was Hercule Poirot, a name synonymous with truth, a man who had faced conspiracies and emerged unbroken. Yet the letter on his desk was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown at his feet. To ignore it was to admit defeat, to concede that the shadows had won. He stood, straightening his tie, and crossed to the window. The rain had stopped, and the city sparkled under a crescent moon. Somewhere out there, in the labyrinth of human motives, a new mystery waited. Poirot's lips curved into a small, determined smile. He would go to Istanbul not out of pride, but because the truth, however fragile, demanded it. The next morning, Poirot rose early, his mind clear. He packed a small suitcase, selecting his finest suits and a notebook for the journey. At the breakfast table, Mrs. Hudson bustled about, offering toast and marmalade, her curiosity barely concealed. "Off on another adventure, Mr. Poirot?" she asked, pouring his coffee. "Perhaps, Mrs. Hudson," he replied, his tone light but guarded. "A small matter requires my attention." She nodded, accustomed to his evasions, and left him to his meal. Poirot ate slowly, savoring the routine, knowing it might be his last taste of normalcy for some time. By noon, he was at Victoria Station, a ticket to Paris in hand, the first leg of his journey to Istanbul. The Orient Express awaited, its sleek cars a promise of elegance and intrigue as the train pulled away. Poirot settled into his compartment, the dossier's ashes a distant memory. The letter from a friend of truth lay tucked in his pocket, its words a map to the unknown. He gazed out the window, watching London fade into the mist, and felt a familiar thrill, the thrill of the hunt, the pursuit of answers in a world that preferred its secrets buried in Istanbul. He would find the truth, or it would find him. Either way, Hercule Poirot was ready.